But yeah, I'm more like an evening coffee person, and I've been trying to, and I think I've had conversations with both of you where I've said I'm trying to like kick the dependence on coffee a little bit, drinking
Mm-hmm.
a little bit less. So this is like, I mean, I like this. This is a huge cup. Like this fits like 4 cups of coffee in one cup, because
Jesus.
this, like, you see how it goes out like that, like to for the back of the helmet. It's hollow, so you can fill it with more liquid.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's
We
a lot.
are we are live now.
It's hollow.
Yeah,
Yep,
see, yeah, no, me, I'm just a morning coffee drinker. That's usually it. Like I wake up super groggy in the morning. I just put on a cup of coffee and like, all right, cool. There's my energy for the day. And then normally, if I have any kind of lack of energy throughout the day, I'll take some pre-workout.
yeah, we've talked about that. I started doing that because I've been, I mean, obviously, like with the whole us having to self quarantine and isolate and whatnot, there's no gym. But even before then, I was terrible at getting myself back on a routine, just because life. But so I have a bunch of pre-workout at the house, and now that, like, obviously it's been X amount of time since I've been able to use it to go to the gym, I'm like, oh, I can go the Joey method and use it like midday for a little bit of energy. So
Yeah, well, I mean, it even says right on the side you can take it on non-workout days too. So it's
yeah,
like,
it's
it's a nice
healthier
little
energy.
kick of energy. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I dig it, And even so, it's like even here at the house, even during the self-quarantine, like my wife and I have Beachbody on demand, so we still work out at home here. I got some free weights, the adjustable kind and stuff like that, and it's good. They go up to 55 each, so you can still get a pretty good workout.
Hell yeah, man. We got Ryan from Nerdy Blurb TV in the chat saying,
Nerdy
"Hey,
Blurb, what's up?
What's going on, man? Good, glad to see you pop in." But yeah, I totally get your use of midday workout, because I'm starting to do it myself, and it makes a difference, because I don't think, at least the one that I have, it's like a BCAA and pre-workout mixture. So at least I know I'm getting some actual benefits of it besides.
Oh yeah, I mean it's better than just like chorking back a Monster or Red Bull or something.
Yeah, and happy Easter to you too, man.
Hey,
Ryan,
happy Easter.
I'm not gonna lie, it's so funny. I think it was like last night I saw something about Easter, and I'm so far removed, I think, both between not being religious and not and being isolated, that I saw something last night. I was like, holy shit, tomorrow's Easter. I was like, I just asked these guys to get up, at whatever time on their respective time zones to hang out on Easter. I was like, shit. I totally forgot.
Yeah, I was last night I was between 3 different live streams. I got cut off from one with Tillium and Tevya, and then I listened to another, and then my family did the house guest thing through Facebook. So I was on online pretty much good 6 hours yesterday, pretty much straight.
Jesus.
It was crazy. But it was fun though. It was fun. We did they tried the whole pub crawl. I don't know if you guys ever did the pub crawl thing online. There's different rules where you go into different rooms in your house, and you got to drink and do an activity in each room of your house, and it's sort of like an online pub crawl. And anyways, it's
interesting.
It's fun, yeah. I mean, it's very important to maintain your alcoholism. I might lose my dignity, I might lose my public exposure, but I can't lose my alcoholism. There's no reason why we should stop drinking just because we're alone, guys. There's no reason. No reason at all. Don't let anybody tell you to sober up. That's just plain wrong. Stand up for yourselves. Drink. Bailey's.
I will stand with you in solidarity with Bailey's in my coffee.
Actually, I'm out of Bailey's. I'm going through withdrawal now. It's horrible.
Yeah.
I just got Kramer.
Yeah, but you have like your one day a year that you really go at it, right, Joe?
Oh god, yeah, no, yeah, it's one day a year, and I just I get whatever I want, and I just go nuts. Like my wife, she filmed the last one where I was like, what was I doing? I was like crawling up the stairs on my back, and then I was letting myself slide down. and stuff. So in the morning, I woke up, I had like some rug burn on my back. And then what was it? It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. I called up my mom, and she lives in PA, 4 hours ahead of us, like you. And yeah, I was just like, Ma, wake up. Hi. So she picked up. I was like, hi, and then I hung up. She was
That's
pissed.
funny. So do you like, will you like occasionally take a sip of drink during the year, or is that literally the only time you let alcohol touch your lips?
That is the only time I let alcohol touch my lips all year.
Holy shit, good for you. I have immense respect for you. I could never do that.
Yeah, well, it takes a lot of dedication. It's like, yeah, ever since my 21st birthday, that's how I've always operated and stuff like that. I think it just goes back to like when I was when I was doing karate class and stuff like that, and I was actually training for the U.S. national team back in the day. And so like, I was just always working out, I was eating clean and stuff like that, and I just, nothing bad in my body.
Shit, man.
And I just kind of like, even though I don't do that anymore, I mean, I still train, but at the same time, it's like, I'm not training on the high competition levels. And I guess I just carried that over. Never saw any reason to change it.
Shit, yeah. That's a thing, man. Good for you. That's it's probably good to have that routine though.
Yeah, definitely. And I always look at it this way too, because I don't touch alcohol all but 1 day a year. When I do touch it, it affects me really heavy.
Yeah, I was gonna say your tolerance is probably
really
low.
I have no tolerance to alcohol whatsoever.
Jeez. You should have seen when we were in New York, man. Because obviously, so it was Boom and my best friend Edwin against me and another one of my very close friends, Tyson. And it was kind of back and forth for a while, and then Boom would just go on a rampage. And mind you, I'm not a beer drinker. I'm a whiskey bourbon guy. And up until that point, I had already had quite a bit. And because he was just smoking us, I was just throwing back beer on top of it.
Oh my God.
And there are a couple really good videos of us like in the bar and like coming out of the bar completely sloshed. Like,
yeah.
Go on.
That's the stuff that you won't see on YouTube.
Yeah.
Though we wish we would, huh?
Yeah, it's a little bit more TVMA, but yeah, I guess Nerdy Blurb's jam is Monsters and G Fuel for breakfast, which I would think is a weird breakfast combination, but
wait, Monster plus G Fuel? Like G Fuel is essentially already a pre-workout.
Oh, it's that, or he says Monsters are his jam for the morning energy breakfast, powder G Fuel.
Wow.
Which I mean, maybe it's a Midwest thing, maybe it's a Ryan thing. I don't know, but that's definitely a routine. We got Spike joining us in the chat saying good morning. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Spike.
Thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, and Spike states the obvious. He says you don't get hangovers either if you drink so little, which is not a problem that I've ever had. So drinking.
Yeah, no, I get a hangover every year.
There you go. I guess Ryan's not really an alcohol guy either, or coffee. Day Mormon life, y'all. Shit, that's a thing. But we've spent a lot of time talking about alcohol, coffee, and various liquids. I wanted to welcome everybody to our first kind of impromptu comic book community live chat, which we are distinctly naming Comics and Coffee. So I guess we can ring in this first kind of comic book community discussion with a solid cheers for the morning. So good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Yes, absolutely.
All right. So for those of you, for some reason, who don't know my two cohorts for this excellent stream, on immediately to, I guess, my screen right is my pal Joe from Joe's Geek Show. Thank you for joining me this morning, brother. I know it's like 8 a.m. over in Alaska.
Yeah, 8:09, man. 8:09. I had to, but I'm usually up by 7 anyway. So, just had to get the baby ready and all that stuff, get the wife up, even though it's her weekend off from work.
God bless her. Much thanks to Tina, man.
Absolutely.
And to his right is my friend and my most frequent collaborator, the Canadian Cape Crusader,
I have.
Boom.
Hello. Good to be here, and I'm awake, and I've been drinking coffee for the last hour. So good. Yeah.
I like the distinct pause there. I've been drinking coffee.
It's like I gotta think this one through.
Yep.
Definitely coffee.
Oh, right. We got some Okie dude in the chat saying, "What's up, boys? Hey, man, thanks for popping in.
Hello.
Hope this is a somewhat pleasant thing to wake up to, unless you came into the beginning where I was talking about how blisteringly drunk I was in New York because Comic Boom smoked me at fucking beer pong. But hey, I'm liking Nerdy Blurb TV in the chat calling us the real life comic Avengers. I'll take it.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll take it. That's a surefire victory. But yeah. So the real premise behind this thing was that I think. I mean, a lot of people are really isolated, holed up at home, and there's a lot of really difficult things kind of running through the airwaves. And I figured, you know what better time than to get two of my favorite collaborators together and sit down, do a live chat with the community, and just talk about comic books, all the things we love about them, and just kind of shoot the shit because, I often do live streams with either one of these two guys. And we have amazing topics that we get to discuss, but we don't always just get to sit down and address commentary from the chat. So I figured this was a great opportunity. So I want to obviously thank Joey and Rocky for getting up earlier than I had to, because you're both behind me in terms of time. So thank you guys for sitting down and chatting over a cup of Joe.
No problem. What time is it there, Boom? Like
10 o'clock. It's
10 o'clock. Okay.
Yeah, 10. Yeah, right
So
now,
you
10 after 10, basically.
You got 2 hours on me then. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So with that being said, first thing to ask everybody in the chat, I'm curious for everybody joining us right now, where are you chatting with us from, and what time is it where you are? I think that I'm pretty curious to see what the viewership is up to and how early they had to wake up to sit down and talk with us for a little bit. But yeah, I think one of the primary things, and we did have, didn't you have one of your Twitter followers, Boom, post a question for us?
Yeah. I'm just looking at it now. The question is, it's from Stratosphere. If you had to kill off one A-list DC hero and one A-list villain, and they would have to stay dead for at least 5 years, who would they be and why?
Oof.
That's a tough one.
That's the thing too. It's like I feel like the only A-list DC heroes are like the 7, like the 7, main members of the Justice League.
I think that's what makes it difficult.
Yeah, it really does.
Well, I mean, Superman and Batman have already been dead, not for 5 years, but it's like, I wouldn't say.
You know what? I think that the only one who hasn't really been, I think they've all really been dead before. Green Lantern's been dead. Flash has been dead.
What about Diana?
Wait, I was about to say Wonder Woman. I don't think Wonder Woman's been dead as far as I know.
No. So probably to rock the boat, since Wonder Woman's comic book has been kind of sucking consistently for quite many years, I would kill off Wonder Woman. Just like Batman said to Superman, when Batman said to Superman before Infinite Crisis, the last time you inspired anybody, Superman, was when you were dead. I think maybe Wonder Woman needs to be dead for a while too. So I'd probably go with Wonder Woman for the A-list hero, and for the A-list villain, I would kill off the Batman Who Laughs for at least 5 years. I don't want to see that ass. I don't want to see that bastard again for a long time.
I am also so over the Batman Who Laughs. He is just so saturated in comic books right now. And it's like, a dark and scary villain to sell books. Throws the Batman Who Laughs in there. I'm so like, I have no, it's over there. I have, that double page splash of Dark Knight's Metal, where they reveal all of the Batman, the evil Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I got a really high quality set of artist prints that were limited edition from Jonathan Glapian, who is Greg Capullo's inker. And it's this really, really nice paper stock, really well printed. There's one print that's just the inks over pencils and one that's fully colored. It's such a great piece of art, and I will never put it on my wall because all it does is remind me of how disappointed I was in that event and in ultimately the Batman Who Laughs, because he's the only thing that's really stuck around.
Yeah, no, I always remember my biggest issue with the Batman Who Laughs. I mean, like you said, oversaturation for one, and secondly is whenever you have a story, like even most recently in the Hell Arisen finale, like Lex Luthor had the dude on the ropes, he had him beat, but then the Batman Who Laughs at the last minute still managed to pull something out of his ass.
Yeah, well, I mean, like it's like the end of Scott Snyder's Batman Who Laughs mini too. It's like, whoa, well, I think maybe I knew that he knew that I knew that this was going to happen, and then he knew that I knew that this was going to happen, and then it just happened, and that was the end of the book, and I was so over it.
Yeah, you know, this reminds me of a movie I watched again last night. It was on. I stayed up till like 2 a.m. I watched Rogue Squadron again, or Rogue One. Sorry,
Rogue One.
And that movie, of course, all the good guys die at the end, really, because they're getting the secrets of the plans of the Death Star, and they all sacrifice themselves. And it's a movie where death matters, and there's something at stake, and it's one of my favorite Star Wars movies. And it's a lesson that, I mean, it's, the fact that death doesn't really matter in comic books is kind of a running joke. I mean, because it's so true. And we all understand why. We're dealing with corporate characters that can make a lot of money for the corporations, but we get it. But there is something to be said about meaningful death. And the fact that we've lost that in comic books is truly, it's very unfortunate. And I do think there is a narrative way that Marvel and DC and other companies could bring back and give more meaning to death. When you have a multiverse, there's no reason why you can't have deaths that stick. I mean, I remember the best, I wish Barry Allen would have stayed dead. And it's not because I hate Barry Allen. I think he means more as a character when he was dead. And it gives more meaning to Wally West's journey, and it still enhances the Flash mythology. But that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Absolutely. Like, that one line where Paradox even said, you were better off dead to Barry. And I was like, yeah, I can agree with that. I mean, not trying to be completely biased towards Wally. I do like Barry. I just don't like him as much.
Yeah. That's saying something from the Flash guy of the group. Shit. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm a little bit partial because my first Flash run was when Jeff Johns brought Barry back. I'll openly acknowledge.
Oh, Rebirth, OG Rebirth. Yeah.
Yeah, I will openly acknowledge that Wally's a better Flash. He's a faster Flash, and he knows the Speed Force better. But I am slightly partial to Barry. But, I will definitely admit that the symbolism of Barry's death and what it means to Wally and the DCU is probably stronger than anything he's been in life. So
yep.
That's a valid point. And while we're discussing things too, I want to give a call to action to everybody in this chat. If you guys have anything that you specifically would like to discuss that is comic book related, feel free to throw it in there, and we'll definitely save some time to approach those things. I guess regarding the death thing, I might say Wonder Woman. Mostly because I don't really know, and I don't really think that I have an idea as to what type of impact that's going to have and what the implications of a Wonder Woman-less DC universe would be. Like it, you know what I mean? I feel like it's the one out of all of the Justice League that you can't sit there and thoroughly kind of run through the possibilities.
Yeah.
So Wonder Woman, I think, would be the answer for me as well.
I think it would force a reevaluation of the character. It would force writers from different titles, when they pay homage to Wonder Woman, it would force them to really reflect on what the character means to them and what, why is she important? Because quite honestly, I think in many ways, writers don't have a clue. I mean, when's the last time you ever read an interview where a writer actually said, "Oh man, I got a Wonder Woman story in me I have to tell." Like, you never hear it. You know, people. Every writer has a Batman story. Every writer says they got a Batman story. Every writer says they got a Superman story. When's the last time you heard a writer come forward and say, "I got a Wonder Woman story I really want to tell. It's been percolating for years inside me"? You never hear it because nobody seems to care about the character.
Supposedly Scott Snyder does, but I assume whatever he's going to do in death metal is going to be botched. So,
well, fair enough. You know, and Scott Snyder, man, all the power to you, man. I'm looking forward to death metal primarily because of the Wonder Woman being center stage, and I will happily. I mean, I will fall on my knees and supplicate myself to Scott Snyder if that's a great Wonder Woman story. No question.
I just want to get death metal to get the end of that year of the villain story.
Dude, I'm not unless a bunch of people that whose opinions I respect come up to me and say, "Trev, if you don't pick this up, you're gonna fucking regret it." After like two or three issues come out, I'll eat my words and I'll go back and I'll buy those issues. But I'm not pre-ordering anything. I'm after like the flop that was Metal, after the flop that was to me his Justice League run. Scott Snyder has kind of lost that faith that I had in him, where I would always at least try everything he puts out. And I'm just not willing to support that book based on his current track record. Even like the descriptions of what's going on, the spoiler art that they've released, it doesn't instill me with any more potential confidence. So yeah, you know, like I said, unless like you guys come up to me 2-3 issues in, you're like, "Trev, you're gonna regret it. Like, you got to pick up this book." Then I'll buy it, but I don't see myself going in there and supporting that book.
Well, I will say this: when I've read, I listened to Scott Snyder's interview. He did. I can't remember the source again. I've watched so much YouTube, but he did an interview. He did a number of interviews and where he talked about death metal. And I watched one. He did about a 45-minute one on DC Access. That's what it was, DC Access, and you could probably find it on YouTube. And I actually got the impression that, and he never came out and said this, but he wants this to have a happy ending. He didn't use those words, but I think he's mindful of the fact that we need some good, especially now, we need a happy fucking ending. Pardon my language.
Yeah.
You know, if you're gonna write death metal right now and give it a shitty ending, like a dark, depressing, vague ending, I don't think that Snyder's gonna do that. I think we're gonna get a happy ending. I really do. And the good guys are gonna kick ass and win finally. And especially now in this pandemic times, I really think that Snyder's working toward that, because I mean, I know I was pretty hard on Snyder, and he was a gentleman. He took my criticism and he conversed with me, direct messaged me on Twitter. I thought that was really big of him, and I read his comments online. He defended his position. I respected that. I think the best writers defend their writing, defend their narratives, and he did that. I respectfully disagreed. Many of us did, but I appreciate him as a writer. He's professional. He's kind, and you know, he's isolated in his house right now. You know, he's a first-time father. He's got a kid that he loves. He brags about on Twitter.
He's got
so
3.
I know that he knows what happiness is, and so he's got what's that?
He has 3 kids.
Oh, sorry, 3 kids. All right. I didn't know that. He only shows one. I only see one on Twitter all the time. So
yeah.
But anyways, he knows what he's. I'm going to choose to have some faith in him. We'll see.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, I kind of feel the same way. Where it's like, I would love to see a happy ending to death metal and stuff like that. Especially, because I always wondered when Robert Venditti took over for those few issues, with the lack of Martian Manhunter and Hawkgirl on the team. I'm often wondering what is it going to mean for death metal as a whole too, if he's going to do something to those 2 characters. But still, it would be nice to have a more satisfying, happy conclusion. Since that's something he doesn't really do very often. But
yeah, I mean, here's the thing. It between all of the metal issues, the tie-in, one-shots, all of his issues of Justice League, it's been like 70 books. And then we're gonna get this. What is it? 6 issues for death metal? Is it 6
I
issues?
think, yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
It's going to take 76 issues for him to resolve one plot line to give us that happy ending. And even if he gives us a happy ending, I mean, it might be what we want, but it doesn't necessarily qualify like good writing. Like he hasn't, you know what I mean? Like he might give you the end you want, but you know what I mean? The execution to get there just hasn't been there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Metal 2, Death Metal, whatever you want to call it, this would have to be literally the best comic event I have ever read to make up for the poor pacing, the lack of cohesion, the weird characterization, like just the amplitudes of like sacrificed quality in writing up
Yeah.
to this point. To be honest with you, I mean, I love Scott Snyder. I really do. Like ComicBoom has said, he is a stand-up guy, very respectable. I mean, he is like, I have a Court of the Owls tattoo. Like, you know what I mean? Like that. It's one of my favorite Batman stories of all time. But I'm also not willing to. I'm not willing to be like a fanboy for anybody. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna say anything of his is good just because it's him. I refuse to do that because, to be frank with you, and I've said this, I think, to both of you, Scott Snyder hasn't written a full story that I have liked in like 2 years, maybe 3 now. So, you know, at which point my faith in him and his trajectory and his current style of writing is kind of plummeted. And I mean that with all due respect. It's not out of hate for the guy, because I really do hold a lot of admiration for him. His Witches is like is probably my favorite horror comic book series, one of my favorite independent titles. Obviously his Batman run is a top 3 Batman run of all time.
His American Vampire is pretty good, and I know he's working on that as well. Spike asked the question in the chat, you know, how do you guys think Death Metal fits into the 5G structure? Maybe it has more than one ending. And that's actually a very good point, because, you know, now, of course, we know 5G might have gone through significant changes right now, but it is worth noting that because Death Metal deals with the multiverse, both the dark multiverse, presumably, and the full multiverse, the regular multiverse, you have to wonder if it could potentially have different endings in different universes, in the dark universe, in the mainstream multiverse. You could, in theory, end up with different endings on different Earths, theoretically, maybe. I mean, so there might be some creativity going on there that could probably work in that regard. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I to be honest with you, I think that with the whole Dan DiDio thing going down the way it did, and now that they kind of have a legitimate reason, although it's not financially efficient for them, they can halt production and totally pivot what the direction is going to be. And I have a very strong feeling that, based off of everything that's going down and the circumstances and the excess time that they have now to set up, there's no doubt in my mind that Death Metal is now going to be the status quo for 5G. Whatever it was a couple of months ago, that's not it anymore. Whatever Scott Snyder decides 5G is, I can guarantee you that is what 5G is going to be.
Yeah, I could absolutely, I could totally see that, you know, because, you know, still crazy with the Dan Didio thing, how fun that was. But yeah, I mean, because like I know in his Justice League book, especially towards the end there, you know, he really did reach into the multiverse and started pulling like every single like Justice League and stuff like in to do that big final fight against the Legion of Doom's army and stuff like that. So you know, I think it will be interesting to see what he does with that premise as a whole too, if he's going to continue that bit with the multiverse and multiple endings. Boom, you mentioned that, again, that is a possibility, but I think, Trevor, you also make a very good point that because of what happened with Dan Didio and what's been going on lately within comics and whatnot, that it's definitely going to be a hard shift from what it was going to be.
Yeah, and the thing is, now with production being halted, at least on the print side, they have the time now to really dig their heels into the ground and pivot into whatever the new direction is. And although I think those of us who are relatively more informed are going to know that they shifted direction, generally I think that they can do it seamlessly without anything else going on.
Yeah.
So
Scott Snyder he was very vague. Like in his DC Access interview, it was clear that that 5G is changing from how they originally conceived it, but he was vague in terms of how they were doing it. He sort of gives I know he's not a politician, but he gives the old political speech almost in terms of, well, it's going to be fun, adventurous, stick to the core of who the characters are, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't mean anything. That doesn't give us any clues or substance as to what the story is going to be. So he says all the right things, but how is this going to end? I would really like to know the degree to which it would change. I think there's no question that I think there's going to be a de-emphasis. There's going to be less of a change. We might see hints of future characters like Luke Fox as Batman. We might see hints of characters of the son of Captain Boomerang being the new Flash. But I think that's going to be greatly minimized because I just can't see them. When we finally get out of this pandemic, the last thing we want to see is somebody else other than Bruce Wayne as Batman. The last thing we're going to want to see after this pandemic with the first DC Flash comic, we don't want to see some new guy as the Flash. I mean, we want what's familiar. We're going to want to return to what's safe and what we remember. And if we come back and DC's right out of the gate when they start publishing comics again, if we're going to get a bunch of different characters and in a different world with no organic buildup, we're going to feel lost and as isolated as we do right now in the real world. And that would be a catastrophic mistake. And I just can't see if DC has any sense that I can't see them doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a good point. Before we continue on with this conversation, just want to say a quick hello to Sonic the Hedgehog and Splash Page Comics joining us in the chat. Thanks for popping in. I hope you guys are having a solid Sunday and are drinking a quality cup of coffee.
I'm out.
Yeah, and then Nerdy Blurb TV is peacing out. Says, yo, thanks for the hangout, y'all. Gotta go have some mix for the little one. Peace out.
Peace.
Hey man, have a happy Easter. I hope you and the family get to enjoy your time together today, and I hope the little one enjoys her Easter egg hunt. So thanks for popping in, brother.
Actually, go ahead.
No,
I was going to say Spike made the comment that splash pages, I'm not sure if he's joking or not, splash pages are not that common anymore in this industry. And I don't know, is that true? Splash pages nowadays with the page count going down lower and lower, there might be some truth to that. I've never really thought about that before.
Yeah, I think you certainly see it more in like event comics that or like oversized issues. But I think there is a point to be said about how like the page counts of standard comics have just been getting lower and lower and lower. And and I've talked many times on like reviews and whatnot about how efficient you have to be on an issue to issue basis at telling your story, because it doesn't really provide a lot of wiggle room. And with that being said, it becomes really, really difficult to tell an efficient story with a current standard size book and fit in a splash page or even a double page splash. So I think that assessment is largely pretty true. I don't think it's like an endangered species necessarily, but I think it is certainly not as common as it was before. What do you guys think?
Right. Well, I was going to let you go first, Comic Joe, but I can interject. I was going to say, I don't think it probably isn't. I never really thought about it before, but there's definitely some truth to that. What I was thinking as Dark Knight was talking was, I was thinking that maybe, the difference between a digital release and a physical release, that there's no reason why in a digital release of comic books you shouldn't get more splash pages. I think that we should get there should be some extras included in a digital release, that if you're going to charge the same for a digital release comic book, that maybe you should get a little bit more for a digital release, because you might not be able to put additional pages in print comics, but there's no reason why you can't put that as an addition into the digital release at no extra cost. and I think they ought to, I think that's something maybe they ought to explore.
Regarding that real quick, I think, well, the reason digital comics are the same price as physical were, as far as I'm aware, because brick and mortar comic book stores were lobbying publishers to not let Comixology and other digital platforms like lower the prices because they thought that it would put them out of business. So the reason that digital comics have pretty much the same content at the same price are strictly because of the lobbying of the local comic book stores, as far as I'm aware. So sorry to interject, but
that's true.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, go ahead, Comic Joe. Sorry.
No, I was just saying it's a good point. But yeah, no, I mean, as far as the splash pages go, I mean, I gotta admit I haven't really noticed, but now that I actually think about it, like some like they have been kind of becoming less and less and stuff like that. Like even more noticeable, I guess, is them going to like say a full page once on one side rather than a double page spread. So I thought that was very interesting. It's something I actually didn't notice till you guys mentioned it.
Yeah. In the chat, we're also joined by 1-2 Comic Talk. Hey man, welcome to the stream. Thanks for popping in. Hope your Sunday's going well. And then Spike also continues his comment, and he says that he thinks that it has to do with the lack of pencilers trying to do extremely detailed stuff like McFarlane or Jim Lee nowadays in favor of more cartoony styles. Personally, I don't think that is the case at all, because I still think that other stylistic comic book artists can still pull off splash pages without like high line work detail, and can make that translate really well in splash pages or double page splashes. Like I said, I think most of it is really just because of how efficient you have to be on the page, and how difficult it is to tell, simultaneously a story that will build on more than one issue, multiple issues, but is also digestible enough so that the reader feels like they've gotten not only their money's worth, but their time out of a single issue. I think it's an interesting take. I don't necessarily agree with that, though. What do you guys think?
I mean, for me personally, I mean, yeah, I'd be more inclined to, agree with you and stuff like that. Also like with the lack of splash pages and stuff coming in comics, I mean, is it possible it might also have something to do with just like the cost of, printing, double pages and stuff with like all the color and whatnot?
Yeah, it could be. I think I'm inclined to. I can appreciate that the days when I think back, there's probably, I think we have the skilled artists out there, but it might be because, as you said, Dark Knight, the complexity of the story maybe requires being very careful with what you put on the page. And every time you do a double page spread, you're using up 2 pages, and that might take away from an artist's ability to effectively illustrate the story in that limited page space that continues to shrink as prices increase. So I think there's definitely that. I do think that there's enough talent out there that they're capable of doing the penciling. I know that Spike is he himself has found an artist competent to that I've seen some of his pages, that he's working on a comic book. And I know that Dark Knight yourself, you've sort of teased me some images on some things you're working on. So you're 2 guys that know the challenges of trying to find an artist to render a story. So I would probably cede to your opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, and we have a Aggressively Relaxing, great name by the way, who says that he sees splash pages all the time. I mean, I like I was saying earlier, I don't think it's necessarily like an endangered species in comics. I just don't think it's common as much in like the regular monthly releases. Like the more I think about it, after Spike brought it up, I don't think I really see them as much outside of like oversized issues through like Black Label or event books. I mean, like maybe it's placebo. Maybe it's totally a placebo effect.
Well, Spike clarified his comments. Spike said that he says what he meant was that these types of artists tend to ask you to write in splash pages. So he's saying a lot of artists like splash pages, which You know, that's interesting. I suppose maybe they get to show off and they have more space to play with on a splash page. I guess that makes a lot of sense. I never thought of it from the artist's point of view before.
You know, I mean, it could definitely be done. I mean, when you think back to, like, say, you know, that 4-issue arc of the death of Superman and stuff like that, where you have the first issue where you have 4 panels per page, then the next issue is 3 panels per page, then 2 panels per page, then the final issue where he dies is 1 panel per page, like 1 full splash picture.
Yeah, no, I mean those are very, very valid points. It's a weird dynamic, and it also too depends on like the collaborative relationship between a writer and artist, because so many of them have so many different, like, I don't want to say gradients of power, but like just in the way that they distribute responsibility, because some go full script, some go Marvel method, and a lot of them go somewhere in between. You know, it's all on the preference of the creative team. So there are so many factors that go into it, but I mean, it was good to get Spike's insight on that as well. We have Tevye Smoka popping into the chat saying, hello. What's going on, man?
Hey, Tevye.
Hope you're doing well, man. Happy Easter.
Yes, happy Easter if you celebrate. Absolutely. Spike says that Gerardo Sandoval is a modern example. I'm not familiar with Sandoval, but if you want to throw a couple things in the chat that he's worked on, I'm more than happy to look those up. That'd be really cool. Are either of you guys familiar with Gerardo Sandoval?
I know Rafa Sandoval.
Yeah, Rafa Sandoval.
Yeah. Spike knows a lot of. I would have to look it up. It sounds familiar, but I guess it's too early in the morning for me to. But he's done Venom. Oh, he's done some Venom lately. He says. Oh, that's right.
Cool. Splash Page Comics says, "Where did the thinking balloons go?" I feel like thinking balloons just kind of turned into internal monologues. And to be 100% honest with you, as like more of a fan of like progressing into modern comics, I prefer the concept of an internal monologue and the kind of style of an internal monologue over thought bubbles. I think it comes off a little bit less hokey to me. It feels a little bit more intimate rather than, using a word balloon or a thought balloon for them to speak like oddly third person. Like an internal monologue, the way it's structured feels like you're really getting into the character's mind a little bit more. It feels a little bit less a little bit more pure, that's just me.
You make a good point. In fact, I remember a word balloon with Brian Bendis, and Brian Bendis came right out and said that you will be judged, that there's a preconception that if you get too many thought balloons for it, and they avoid it. Most modern editors in comic books, my understanding is that they avoid having word or thought balloons, and thought balloons make you look unprofessional. There is a perception that it's hokey, and in fact, many of them go out of their way to do it. Tom King said point blank that he doesn't like using them for the simple reason that he feels that it's unprofessional, and that it says that you should be able to write a story without them. I want to be blunt on this. I think that's fucking nonsense. I think we've lost something with the loss of thought balloons. I think they're crucial in some stories. I think they should be utilized more, not less. I think it's nothing but ego and self-pretension on the part of the writer that presumes that you shouldn't use them. Comic books, last time I checked, they sold a hell of a lot more during the decades when we had thought balloons. Now that's not because there was thought balloons.
Yeah,
I understand the basics of logic here, but I'm just basically saying that to dismiss. I mean, look at, what would you rather have? Would you rather have Brian Bendis covering up the entire page with dialogue? I mean, what's the difference? Bendis doesn't like thought balloons, so he'll give us 40 times the amount of dialogue or word balloons. I mean, to me, that's a convenient example I'm using, but I personally believe that thought balloons have their place, and the fact that they've been pretty much abandoned because of this false assumption that they're not needed. I think it's nonsense. I think it's just plain lazy writing sometimes, or maybe fear of maybe not fitting in, because it's almost like a black mark. it's almost like you never see thought balloons anymore because most modern day writers avoid it like the plague. And I think that's a mistake. But
So by thought balloons, are you roping in internal monologues with thought balloons, or are you
well,
distinguishing?
first of all, that's what they are. I mean, that's what they are. I mean, look,
Yeah.
having a square on the top of the page where, because now the thought is you put a square at the top of the page and you'll color it blue and it'll be Superman's thoughts. And then when Batman's thinking something, Batman's thinking almost in a third person, and his will be a darker blue. And so they have different ways to convey the thoughts. I know where you're going. I know what you mean, Dark Knight, when you say that. I understand that, and that works well too. But sometimes you want to know a character's thoughts in the heat of the moment, and a thought balloon. There's nothing better than a thought balloon that conveys that. And sometimes, to me, they're not creative enough. Sometimes a thought balloon is better than a multicolored, thought box. Because now that's what we're getting. We're getting thought boxes where two or more characters are reflecting back, and everyone tries to be so clever. And I would encourage people to look back on some of the Silver Age comics, and they weren't all nonsense. Some of them, to me, it can be effectively done. But
yeah, well, I think we lost Dark Knight. But okay, I guess I'll just kind of go into it. I mean, my whole thing with sort of like the loss of the thought balloons and stuff like that was more so just having to do with like when you read, because especially since I've been reading going back and rereading some like older Flash and stuff, and watching it become more and more current is, like say the artwork, for example, where the artwork's been getting better and stuff like that. And I was like really looking at some of those old comics where like, the thought balloons and the thought boxes are there's just so much on the page that it's kind of, covering up the artwork. So that as we became more modern, I feel like that that's maybe why they started to kind of step away from thought balloons as sort of a way to kind of, as the artwork was getting better and was able to also help tell the story in its own way as well, through the dynamics of the artwork, that they thought, okay, well, we don't really want to cover up the artwork as much anymore, so we have the nice little thought box, which then may lead into the dialogue box, and then that way you can see more of the picture. But I understand what you're saying about like the intimacy of also having the thought balloons and stuff like that. But I found myself as I was going through that golden age Flash, silver age Flash and stuff like that when you started to take the thought balloons away and just concentrated on the artwork and the dialogue with just a few words in a thought box, that it did look a little cleaner and less cluttered, and I thought was definitely more visually appealing.
Yeah. And I think sorry, we've lost Dark Knight.
Yeah, he's gone again.
You keep trying to come back, and you appear, and then you disappear. Eventually you'll get on again. We'll keep trying, Dark Knight. I'll just make a quick note. Spike states, Spike definitely agrees with you. I'm definitely in the minority on this. Spike thinks it's lazy. Spike says, I think narration caps are literary lazy. He says they tend to go to omniscient narrators. Novelists tend to try to avoid these. You have to use more coherent narrative voices.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's in line with what you said. And I acknowledge that it does look cleaner. Sometimes it can look sloppy. It does look cleaner when you use thought boxes and you use different devices to do it. However, I do think, though, that there's a certain amount to it. I think it's a little bit of a lost art.
Yeah.
And I think that I just wish writers would not be so dismissive of the thought balloon, because I never saw thought balloons as taking away from the story. I always thought them as enhancing it. And I never thought of them as being lazy, because this idea that, especially, a lot of people put too much on their artist. They assume that their artist can convey what the character's thinking. That's absolutely not true. And actually, I would point to the very writers that claim that. Part of the reason why I'm not liking Bendis's writing in Superman is that I don't know what his characters are thinking.
They're not.
Ivan Reis is
There's
a
your
great
answer.
artist, but Ivan Reis might be a great artist, but I don't understand what he's conveying half the time. So Bendis is hoping the artist will draw a nice expression or somehow will get what's going on because they don't want to use a thought balloon. Well, last time I checked, you're telling a story. It's kind of important. This isn't a movie. This isn't a movie where we can see more clearly an actor's expressions or what have you. And I think they assume too much in terms of the power of the artist sometimes. And thought balloons, I would not consider them an inherently lazy device. I would consider them a necessary device at times. But
oh yeah, no, absolutely. Oh yeah, no, I mean, I in no way would ever have ever thought that thought balloons were lazy in any way whatsoever. And it is something that I think can still be used sparingly, to as not to cover up the pages themselves, but it could, it's definitely something that, again, though, I see your point, but I also do understand why they kind of stepped away from it a little bit. But you do make a very good point, about sometimes writers thinking that, the artist can just convey everything. Sometimes it is nice to have some kind of, written out representation of what the character is thinking. So I do agree with that, and I think that when you look at the past comics and comics today, I do think that there is definitely a middle ground that can be achieved with thought balloons where you can use them, just not as often. Like if you have a panel where you're using thought balloons, maybe not use thought boxes and vice versa. That way you're not cluttering up the panel too much. What do you think? I think there's a good middle ground.
I agree with you. And, I'm thinking back and just a quick note. Dark Knight says he'll be back in a minute. He's having internet issues. He just reset his router. As far as I know, we're still live here and people can see us.
Yeah.
And just to build on your comment, Spike made the comment that he says, take Watchmen as an example. He says, look at the Watchmen and take away the words and you've lost 75% of the story. And the caps are good.
Mm-hmm.
They're good there because Rorschach's voice is from his journal, not an omniscient narrator. And that's a great example. That's a great example. And I don't, there's no question. And Watchmen is considered one of the greatest graphic novels of all time. And I think Spike probably nailed why when Watchmen was probably, and maybe Spike can correct me on this, but I think Watchmen might have even been one of the first comic books that maybe deliberately abandoned the thought balloon per se, and with its particular style of storytelling. And that might be one of the reasons why it was so revolutionary in terms of of storytelling and narrative, modern day narratives in graphic novel form.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely makes you think. It just seems odd to me that a narrative form, a narrative device like a thought balloon would be literally almost completely abandoned in favor of all these other devices as opposed to supplement them. And that's what I find so odd. I don't see the reason why you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can have both.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there, and I think that, when they come, as comics continue, it'd be a nice idea to revisit and then just, maybe be able to kind of, like I said, hop back and forth, but use it in an artistic way, where, it's like, this panel can have one, this panel can have the other and stuff like that. And like each one is used, in a creative way to help, drive the book along.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hello.
You're back.
Welcome back to my own stream. Thank you guys for being so patient, and I appreciate you two for holding down the fort. You guys are the best. I don't know, my internet just kept spazzing out, so luckily StreamYard knew to have faith in you guys to let you guys run the ship. So.
Well, yeah. Well, we're still there. We were just talking about building on some of Joe's comments, and Spike is definitely Spike was just sort of giving us a lesson here and giving us an example of Watchmen in terms of how the story of Watchmen utilizes instead of using thought balloons, the award-winning Watchmen series, graphic novel, of course, did a masterful job of using the third-party, not using an omniscient narrator, but utilizing Rorschach's journal as the voice, and that was a very brilliant use of that. And so I don't know. Have you been hearing our comments, Dark Knight, to comment?
Yeah, here's the thing. The actual like thought bubble itself, I'm not really in favor of. I like the use of certain forms of narration, and I think Spike does in this comment here specifically bring up a great point that you have to use more coherent narrative voices.
Mhm.
I think that there are really, really useful iterations of like internal monologue or narration in comics because it can be used to totally direct kind of the process of the narrative. Between like internal monologue, like for me personally, my favorite Batman books are Batman books with internal monologues because he is emotionally and mentally complex. And I think it really helps to enhance the story, helps to enhance the understanding of the character. Like any technique in any form of storytelling, it can be used poorly. And in fact, most people do use it poorly. And I'll definitely concede that. But I think when used well and when used intelligently by writers, it can really enhance the story. And you bring up Watchmen, there are stories like that where maybe it doesn't need it. And if it does, if your story doesn't need it, if your narrative doesn't need it, and that's totally fine. But I would also argue that Rorschach's journal does in a way serve similar functions to an internal monologue. It is very much his processing, and it gives key to a lot of not only character traits, but it does start to develop aspects of the plot as well. So again, it's not necessarily a thought bubble or an internal monologue, but it is kind of a mechanism to accomplish the same things that a good internal monologue or a good thought bubble would.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Spike does say that I made the comment and I asked if Watchmen was maybe one of the first to sort of first major works not to use the thought bubble, and he says it wasn't. He says if he remembers correctly, he thinks a lot of people did not get the Proust principle applied to Rorschach's journal, and that's likely true. I don't know enough about the history of the narrative form in comics. I suppose I could guess. That's interesting because when you think back about Watchmen, you have the thought. You didn't have thought balloons, but you had Rorschach's thoughts in his journal. You also had a very interesting technique used by Dr. Manhattan, where his thoughts were sort of omniscient. He was sort of like the god of the soul of the narrative in a sense. And so the thoughts of the characters themselves, they were never expressed through thought balloons. And probably Watchmen is an excellent example of, as Spike said, if you take away the words of Watchmen, that's what did he say? Take Watchmen, take away the words, you lost 75% of the story. And the caps are good, and the caps are good there because Rorschach's voice is from his journal, not an omniscient narrator. So, yeah, it's interesting. But I don't know, maybe I'm old school, but I still miss me some thought balloons.
Yeah, I mean, I think specifically bringing up Watchmen on Spike's behalf was a really great topic too, because it handles other mechanisms that translate kind of the same function as the thought bubbles with Manhattan's monologues and Rorschach's journal, and it does them very intelligently. You know what I mean? It's not directly a word balloon or a thought bubble, but it translates kind of the same concepts really, really well. So regarding like the hokiness of a thought bubble, I think that like the thought bubble itself, speaking very distinctly about like golden and silver age, cloudy thought balloons where they say, I, Batman, blah, 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 is a little bit outdated. So I still think that the more modernized kind of cousins of the thought balloon, like internal monologues, journal writings, letters, things of that nature, can accomplish that same exact thing, but more efficiently. But again, that's also going to be like how efficient it is and how good it does that is going to be a product of the writer. So I did also want to say welcome to the Geek Fortress. Sorry, I was kind of spittering out of the conversation when you popped in. But welcome to the stream. Also, welcome to Brevin Campbell, who joined us in the chat as well. Thank you guys for popping by. We
Hey,
appreciate
Brevin. Hey, Geek Fortress.
it. Let's see.
Uh,
What else we got in the chat here? Aggressively relaxing. Who was Manhattan talking to? I thought he was talking to us. I think he breaks that fourth wall. I think he's aware that we are experiencing his story, and I think he is talking to us. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean that's what I've always thought.
Yeah, and and I think that's a great point that he was talking to us, and I think it helped to reinforce the idea that Dr. Manhattan was essentially a god. He had become a god. He had transcended his humanity and was struggling with his godhood and essentially speaking to all of us from that perspective and trying to sort of come to terms with his new awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I know a couple of the guys in the chat, like Samoki Dude and Splash Page Comics, as well as Spike, are bringing up as to how like thought bubbles can give insight to the character, and they certainly can. But like I was saying before, I think that the direct use of thought bubbles in like the old kind of original method is kind of antiquated. I think the thought bubble has now evolved into like internal monologues, which, like I was saying before, I think are a more intimate way to use a thought bubble because there's like a weird formal way that they use thought bubbles in like the voicing. Whereas internal monologues, it is pure, unadulterated, unstructured thought.
Do you want to do it after she gets up?
You know what I mean? So for me, I think the internal monologue and in these other methods that these writers are using to translate kind of the same intention as the thought bubble are arguably more efficient. So I think we can still get that insight to the character, their emotions, their thought process, just by more modern means. Let's see.
Samoki Dude said that Dr. Manhattan never says that he's tired of people and their conflicts. Well, Spike points out that he does. And that's true. I think Dr. Manhattan does get tired of humanity. I think that's why he sort of leaves at the end of Watchmen to sort of try to find his own path. And of course, he ultimately ends up in the DC universe, as we know.
Yeah,
and screwing up the New 52.
Yeah,
or creating the New 52.
Which it's funny because he gets tired of humanity is still one last vestige of his own humanity because he expresses wants and desires, and perhaps fatigues.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of an interesting irony. We also have Captain Comics joining us. He says, "Morning, everybody. Good morning, my friend.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us." Yeah, I mean, Watchmen is obviously such a stimulating conversation because you can break apart all of like the technical tools and usages within it, whether it's art, whether it's writing, whether it's the collaboration between the two. I mean, there's just so much to it. And I think it was really cool how we broke off a comment about word balloons or thought bubbles and went that far with it. It's super, super interesting. Yeah, it's I don't know. I mean, I missed a good part of you guys discussing it. So, you know, maybe after we go off live, one of y'all can fill me in about that part. But we also have Ant Tuhar popping into the chat. Says, "Hey, y'all, sorry for being late. No apologies, man. It's all good. Thanks for joining us. Happy Easter." So my question for you guys, you know, we've done between the three of us, we've done a various number of like recommended reading books, you know, for comics and quarantine and all of these shenanigans. Is there one, if you guys had to give me one current book that is going on right now, or give the chat recommendations, one current book that you think is worth somebody going back and catching up with so that they can read along once comics are being published again, what would you pick?
Jeez.
I like Bloodshot from Valiant going currently, the Tim Seeley book.
Yeah, who's draw? Is it Brett Booth? Is Brett Booth drawing that book?
Yeah, I think so.
What's going on with it? Can you give us a small synopsis, a little teaser?
Yeah, absolutely. Currently in the book, Bloodshot has been recruited into this organization called the Burned, which is basically full of different CIA, FBI, special forces type of people that have worked for the government, have served their respective countries, but then have been burned by their own government, just kind of cast aside and sort of come together in this collected group in order to basically strike back against their governments. Sort of, in a retaliation sense. So then they recruit Bloodshot, because he's very much, someone who is, when he was alive, he was a soldier and all that stuff, then got turned into a weapon for a little while. And so then they're bringing him into the organization. But then I'm trying to think because I don't want to give away too much. But they're also kind of there's also a bit of a side story that's been going on with this girl character that Bloodshot had saved as she was a child when he saved her, but she also has powers. And at the time, when he was working for the U.S. government and stuff like that, he didn't realize at the time that they were going to take her and turn her into a weapon. So then, there was also that became a story in itself where he was trying to go in and get this girl out after she became an adult. And, then most recently, some stuff happened. Again, I'm trying not to spoil too much, but there's some stuff happened in the book. She takes him to this secret underground base with where the government's just keeping all of these interdimensional monsters and engineered creatures and stuff like that. And it's actually just been really wild, man. I really like what Tim Seeley's been doing on Bloodshot.
Interesting pick. I'm not usually a Valiant guy, but I think you might have just sold me. What about you, Boom?
It's actually, I would probably, I've reread Metal. I would reread Metal because we're going to be going into death metal. So probably reading that, owning up on probably rereading Justice League a little bit, if in order to prepare for what is going to be coming from DC, because we're definitely going to be getting a death metal. I just finished reading the 9 volumes of East of West by Jonathan Hickman. I finished that story. There's total 46 issues. There's 9 volumes, and you can buy the Humble. It's called the Humble Bundle, I think. You can just Google it, and for $21 Canadian, you get all 9 volumes of Hickman's East to West. Plus, you get his Primerica. You get all of it, all his indie stuff, pretty much. It's just incredible, and I'd recommend that. East of West is essentially, imagine if the 4 Horsemen of Apocalypse came back, but Death falls in love. That throws a wrench into the plans because you need all 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse to bring in the end of times. But if Death falls in love, well, it's kind of hard to hearken in the end of times if Death falls in love. And then it falls in love with the leader of one of the nations. And then there's all these rich characters involved in all these various nations. Hickman builds up a rich universe just like he does with the X-Men, except it's better because it actually has an ending. So it has an ending. It doesn't go on forever. Because the criticism of Jonathan Hickman's X-Men is that it's just the new status quo. It's going to go on forever. It's never going to end, et cetera, et cetera. East of West has an ending, and it's well worth the read.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I had was it with Ryan Nerdy Blurb TV when I think we were talking about it on a stream a week ago, and after you kind of singing its praises to me the other day, I'm all in on it. I think that's something I'm going to have to dive into while we're kind of locked up at home. In terms of current books, I'd highly recommend Donny Cates' Thor. I mean, it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it sucks that we're going to have to wait so long because the book is very quickly paced. So you're going to run through the current 4 issues that are out like that. And then unfortunately there's going to be a halt. But it also makes it easy for you to catch up. But the stakes of this story are huge. The the kind of direction that Donny Cates is taking is really interesting. We're finally seeing Thor as King of Asgard. It's the thing that he's been kind of striding for many years, and now that he has it, what happens? There are a lot of wrenches being thrown his way. Not to mention awesome art by Nick Klein. So if you guys aren't reading the current Thor book, highly recommend you go pick up the prior 4 issues. It's easy to catch up. And Spike made a comment in regards to Tim Seeley and Bloodshot. He says that Tim Seeley is a fun guy to read. He actively collects his stuff, and he's made him sign hundreds of books when he comes to visit. Yeah. I mean, Seeley's done some really good stuff. I was actually a fan of a majority of his DC Rebirth Nightwing run. I know Boom, sorry, you were just about to say something.
Yeah. I wasn't going to say anything, no.
Oh, okay.
just nodding in agreement. Yep.
Yeah. Nah, I mean, those are some really great recommendations. I think how many issues are out now of that Bloodshot run, Joe?
Bloodshot currently, you've got 8 in total because there was an issue 0 that came out before issue 7.
Okay. So it sounds easy enough to get a hold of.
I would say so, and I think they're already collecting the first. I don't know if they're collecting. I think they're collecting the first story in a trade already too.
Mm-hmm.
That may hopefully be out after this is done.
Yeah, hopefully. Speaking of reading material too, I wanted to make sure everybody who's watching is privy. Marvel via Comixology and their Marvel Comics app is giving away a bunch of full digital graphic novels on those platforms. And I'm going to put a link in the live chat here, and I'll try to put it in the description later for those watching on demand. But that's a link to the list of all of the books that they're giving away. Like they are full, like, and graphic novels. And like, it's not like
and they're good. Yeah, they're good ones too. Like the Phoenix Saga. Oh, there you go. Boom's reading Bloodshot.
There you go.
Wow. It's really good. I didn't want to interrupt Joe. He was doing such a good job explaining it. I didn't need to mess it up, but it's I agree. And I also love Ray. I love Ray. I've collected Ray.
Yeah, dude. Ray's really good.
I love Ray. And also Exo Man of War just came out. #1 came out before the pandemic hit. So
and that's a number 1. So definitely get that one too. If you want to get some like non-DC, non-Marvel books. Like I gotta say, like overall, I've been really impressed with Valiant over the last few years and stuff like that. And I don't oftentimes I don't hear enough people talk about their books because, like, I mean, for me, I love their revival when it came to like Ninjak and stuff like that. Moving into Ninja K, Robert Venditti's Exo Man of War was awesome. I thought. So
it actually bothers me, and I'm gonna make a comment because I feel compelled to. Heather Antos is an editor at Valiant, and she's actually done a reasonably good job. But yet there's still remnants of memories of 2017 when she was an editor at Marvel during the milkshake days, where people still continue to give her a bad rap from 2017, and she doesn't deserve it in my mind. She makes some comments online. She deserves some pushback online because she provokes people online. I'll grant you that, but she did learn some things at Marvel, and I think Valiant's done a reasonably competent job with their comic book line, and I'm astonished at the criticism that some people out there will give Valiant. And a lot of times, a lot of the guys that will criticize Valiant now, I actually openly wonder. In fact, some of them I know actually don't read the very comic books they're criticizing. And it really kind of grates on my nerves a little bit, but I sort of keep my comments to myself. So it's one of the rare moments that I'll actually say something in defense, maybe push the envelope a bit, because when a comic book company is doing well, and they always point to the sales. They say, well, Valiant sales are lower than they've ever been. Well, guess what? Wake up. I mean, look at the big two. Everyone's, everyone was sort of on a downward trend a little bit. Marvel's glutting the market, and anyways.
Yeah, no, and I definitely agree.
Compelled to say that. I just wanted, because I'm glad that we're singing Valiant's praises a little bit. And just remember that if a comic book company is doing well and the quality is there, maybe the sales aren't there, but that doesn't mean that it's not good quality, and it doesn't mean that some of the people that work there are don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that because, like, I know on Messenger, like, what was it, about a week back there, Dark Knight, like, you and I were even having a conversation about, like, how upsetting it can be, you know, where some people there's like some carried bias from you know, people who read comic books, like, oh my god, this is garbage, so now I'm going to just put down every single book that comes out under this person or under this publisher. You know, it was an argument on in a comic book Facebook group I had a while back where there was a guy there were people actively saying that the Immortal Hulk is trash, that Johnny Cage Thor is trash, you know, that they're just SJW filled garbage. I'm like, are you even reading the books? You know, it just boggles my mind, you know. And like you were saying about Heather Antos, yeah, I mean, she went over to Valiant, and yeah, I think she's been doing a really good job over there. Valiant, honestly, I think has been bringing me just a little bit more joy recently than the big two, and in a lot of respect.
I agree.
Yeah, it's really, really upsetting, man. And those biases, like, you know, when I first got into comics, I think like 16, maybe 17, and I had I was a DC guy through and through. Like, I had my bias, and it's just like all of these guys, like, I don't know. After about a year of reading comics, I just, like, you know, I just experienced all of these different publishers and let that thing go. And there are so many people out there that just don't grow up past that initial bias, because I feel like when you get into comics, like, there is a certain sense of, like, loyalty, you know, that you're going to have to wherever you start. And I get that, but yeah, a lot of people don't grow up past it. And there's, like, this really destructive way that people have biases, that in which they'll hate on other things, and they'll also kind of stan. I don't know if everybody in the chat is familiar with, like, the term stan. It's just like when they unbridledly love and sing the praises of somebody or something, no matter how bad it is. Like, on both sides. You know what I mean? Like, I talk about guys like Snyder, who I love. Like, I did a stream with Boom before I took my hiatus, and we were talking about, like, the central themes of Batman. And Boom had something, I don't remember exactly what it was, that I disagreed with. And I passionately went on for like 10 minutes straight and was like, no, this is why Scott Snyder's Batman is, like, the best thing since sliced bread. And, you know, but at the same degree, like, if he writes something that is just not good, I'm not going to defend it. Like, in fact, I'm going to be the one calling him out for it. So I think it's equally as destructive, you know, because people will have biases against creators or publishers strictly for not being DC, for not being Marvel, for not being this. And it brings up some interesting topics of conversation, you know, because earlier, if I can find the chat, Samoki Dude brought up, like, indie comics versus big two. And it's an interesting kind of dichotomy here, because I've been saying for the better part of a year that I've been largely disappointed with DC's main line. And I'm looking for, and I said on a stream with Ryan the other day, and I said it with ComicBoom before. Lately, I've been wanting to read kind of more digestible stories that I can knock out in, like, 1, 2, maybe 3 trade paperbacks. And really where I'm getting that stimulation from are mostly indie books, because I'm telling these really tight, really well articulated stories. And most of the time it's publishers like Image right now, or like Karen Berger's line at Dark Horse, for example, that are telling the stronger stories, the more creative stories, the ones that are really kind of pushing the needle. And the big two aren't. And I'm not, you know, going to say that, like, indie beats big two as, like, this big general statement, but it you know, it does kind of validate the fact that, you know, all of these different publishers, they put out competitive work, like competitive good work. And, like, even now, I mean, you know, people are real mixed on Marvel. I'd say Marvel has DC beat right now in terms of just, like, the sheer level of quality in their main line. So yeah, it's I don't know. It's important to kind of dismantle your biases and to just, you know, have your opinions, and your opinions might not be the same as everybody else's, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong. But just have your own opinions and make them educated, because hating on somebody's work and not knowing anything about their work is a terrible thing to do, because you're putting your kind of uneducated thoughts out into the ether for somebody who might be interested in reading those books to hear that and to not give those books a try. And in the same regards, it's just as bad to look at a creator just because you like the creator and say, oh, this thing that they did that everybody is panning and saying is bad is actually really good because they wrote it. It's, I mean, it's a peculiar situation, you know?
Yeah.
I think Spike makes an interesting comment. He says, I think the problem is everyone is tired of their own favorite publisher. I think they collectively make very bad books lately. You can always find the one good book, but there is a real decline. And I think there's some truth to that. I think sometimes I get too tied up to DC, and, you know, and if I read anything by anybody else, it feels different. And sometimes I need to step away from DC just to, you know, take a breath and appreciate that, you know, the grass sometimes is a little greener in other pastures once in a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I did want to bring up, because I said that I would, Brevin earlier asked a question of us, and he wanted to know, do we think that with the quarantine that the 5G Free Comic Book Day book will be erased? I'm sure they're going to put out something to hype up whatever 5G is. I have a feeling that whatever it is, because they're steadily pushing back Free Comic Book Day, and at this point, I don't know when it's going to be.
Mhm.
But I'm sure that whatever it is probably going to be a little bit more like death metal oriented. And like I was saying before, it kind of translates to 5G, because I am like 99% sure that whatever death metal, the consequences of death metal are going to be what leads into 5G. What are you guys thinking?
Yeah. No.
Well,
Go ahead.
Sorry. No,
go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, I think it's going to, I think that they should proceed with it. I think that they already we already heard, even prior to the pandemic, we had heard that they had made some changes to the content of Free Comic Book Day comic book. And so I'm not sure what those changes were, but I think it's already the case that there's been some changes consistent, likely with Scott Snyder's vision as opposed to Dan Didio's, for obvious reasons. And yeah, I do think that I do think that we're going to get some changes in that regard. And I do think, quite frankly, that DC at a minimum should release the Free Comic Book Day digital release that digitally at a minimum at this point. But
I think it'll get released physically eventually, no matter what, because Free Comic Book Day is a huge like financial opportunity for brick and mortar stores. So I'm sure we'll get it. It's just a matter of when. Joey, what are you thinking?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that you know, first off, I'm hoping Free Comic Book Day is still going to happen. I'm sure it will, in some regard, even if local shops have to throw it themselves. But yeah, no, when it comes to the whole plan book for the Free Comic Book Day for 5G, you know, yeah, I do think that there's definitely going to be some changes and stuff like that. You know, again, because of the departure of Didio, and really because that was his baby for the most part, and with him gone and stuff like that, in the currently with the quarantine going on and stuff with everything with the comics, I'm pretty sure that, like you said, they're going to go on the hill of whatever death metal ends on will become the status quo for 5G. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure like I said, we're still going to get the book. It just might not be 100% the same book. I was just reading a while back that there were already had been some changes made. Like they took what was it, like a Wonder Woman story out of it or something like that. Like there was a story. Yeah. So, something along those lines, where there was a story removed and they put another one in. It was a little more focused in one direction versus versus another. So it'll be very interesting once the book is released to see what it entails, and will give us that idea of what 5G is going to be like. I mean, I had heard so many theories about how 5G could change. I've heard the whole it's going to go from this to this. I've heard some say that they think that maybe 5G is just going to end up being like a off the cuff event book that won't impact the greater DCU because they're going to want to keep everything as mainstream and status quo as possible, you know, because like Boom had stated, you know, people are going to want familiarity when we return with print comics and stuff like that. So, I mean, it'll be very interesting to see what they do with it. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty much my thoughts on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did note that Spike mentioned that I didn't know that there are some free comic book day books on Comixology, that they release some of them.
Really?
Maybe they release some of them. That's what he said. I haven't checked that out.
They haven't for this. They haven't for this year, but they do like every year release some free comic book day issues on Comixology as well.
From the previous years, though.
I don't think so. I think Marvel and DC generally release them digitally also, but I think the big precedent is that local comic book stores probably will not stand for it if they also don't get it. So I think that they'll feel deprived if, for example, big publishers were to release their free comic book day issues during the quarantine, because local comic book stores will be, you know, the last to get it if they get it at all. But Boom, I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
Well, yeah, I was just going to mention Nerd Scum. Hello, Nerd Scum. He's in the chat. He
hey.
mentions, well, you can read it on the screen there, but he says well, he made that comment. He goes on to say that, according to Diamond, Nerd Scum works at a comic book shop, and he says on the listing, Diamond, it's still listed as free comic book day for this coming September. So it hasn't been canceled. It's just been moved to September, and they're still soliciting free comic book day books, but for September this year instead of the usual May.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Thank you. First of all, welcome, Nerd Scum. Thanks for popping in. Second of all, that's a really interesting insight, because I didn't know about that at all. So that's interesting, and I'm curious to see what that's going to be like and how that's going to kind of like shape things moving forward, because I know, or at least I thought, that death metal was originally solicited for like end of the summer / fall. So yeah, things are definitely going to be moving and shaking.
You know, I just have a quick thought. I'm hoping that I would love if they took 4 or 5 issues and just put them in a trade. I'd rather buy a trade of the comics, you know, because what I'm not looking forward to. I'm not looking forward to going to the comic book shop in August or July and having a $1,000 bill for comic books, because there's a backlog of comics that we're going to get from Diamond. I mean, I don't even know if I want that. So I'm going to be inclined to put a kibosh on a lot of it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I wish I realize that's just the reality, but I'm thinking of the logistics, and I think it's going to be kind of a mess and a disaster, because if comic book shops, and I love my comic book retailer, but even he's got to know, look, I'm not going to, you know, we're all surviving this crisis. I'm not going to walk up to my comic book shop and say, okay, yeah, I'm going to buy $2,000 worth of comic books that's accumulated over 4 or 5 months. That's not going to happen. So, you know, I think Marvel and DC have got to maybe reevaluate in terms of how they're going to maybe put this stuff out. Maybe they shouldn't put it out as a floppy. Maybe they should package it differently. I don't know.
I think they're definitely going to be doing, well, I mean, you have to think that I don't think that they're just going to magically be like, boom, here's all the books that would have been coming out during that time at all. I think that literally what's going to happen is things are going to start rolling out, and we're going to pick up where we left off, like, and just be completely delayed by the however many months it's been. And if that, I think that at least on Marvel's side, I've heard like Donny Cates talk publicly about how they're even slowing down the production of some books and cutting the production of some and letting others kind of continue to map out the future. So I would also potentially be inclined to say, like, maybe we might see like an even further suspension of some books in order to kind of start rolling out like bigger books and let people kind of get reaccustomed to coming back. So I hope
that's the case.
I hope
so
too.
I think that would be the case, quite honestly, you know, because, you know, because that's my thought process. The same as you, Dark Knight, is, you know, they're not going to, you know, Diamond's just not going to ship and drop, you know, 12, like 6 or 8 issues of Batman all at once. It's just not realistic to be able to think that, comic book collectors and readers are going to be able to keep up with that, and as it is right now is, like DC and stuff, like the printers have stopped for the most part, and there's going to be no new books being printed. So, it's very reasonable to assume that, when the comic book stores open up back up, when Diamond opens back up, when, DC and Marvel get everything rolling again, that it's definitely going to be gradual and stuff. And, definitely going to be a pick up where we left off kind of scenario, as not to overwhelm the market right away, and even some where people have, or some of the articles have talked about maybe DC or Marvel looking at other avenues to get books out. Cause I mean, that's when you think about it, it's like comics have all but stopped with print, which is fairly interesting because, we're still getting, newspapers, magazines, all these companies are still going, why are they going when the comics industry has to stop, right? So, is it quite possible that, the printing and like the printing and shipping that does like those magazines and stuff like that, could DC and Marvel start to kind of look at those avenues in order to get books out? Obviously maybe not go into the comic book store because they're closed, but like just put maybe as a way of putting comics up maybe back in the grocery store or something like that. Which I think would be a really interesting way of getting comics out again if this shutdown persists on a more lengthy basis, because I don't know. It's like I know things are May 1st. Things are supposed to go back to normal still. Hopefully we don't get another month added onto it, but and just in case. But yeah, it's definitely my feelings on that one.
Yeah, and the thing is, and commenting on what you're saying here and what Spike says in the chat about Diamond being canceled, I mean, a lot of the bigger comic book publishers are looking for other distributors to kind of affect a multi-distribution model. ComicBoom and I talked about it. I think it was on my channel. We did a comic book COVID-19 stream where we were discussing like potential futures of comic books. And I actually, through a publishing class that I'm taking, I was speaking to somebody who is a marketing director for Scholastic. And she was saying that like DC and Marvel are actually talking to a lot of book publishers to use their distributors and to partner up with them in some type of manner to get comic books, like distributed into other types of stores, into bookstores and things of that nature. So, I mean, I think Diamond will probably, kind of hobble on out of this, but it's definitely not going to be the only distributor of comics moving forward. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because now comic books are going to be introduced, I think, it sounds like with a little bit more presence in bookstores and other types of stores of that nature. So I almost wonder if, in a way, this kind of killing off of Diamond is going to be a real, I mean, it's definitely a positive that they're looking for multi-distribution, but it's going to be interesting to see what comics are going to be doing numbers wise once they're thrown into, the standard bookshelf market.
I note that I listened to, just first I would say Nerd Scum. This is related to what Nerd Scum has stated on this stream. I also listened to a great podcast. I forget the YouTuber, but he had Brian Hibbs, who's a well-known, probably one of the largest retailers in the United States. He's quite outspoken. Brian Hibbs and a number of other retailers. They, in fact, the top 3 in the U.S. were all in the same YouTube stream, and they all essentially believe that Diamond will likely survive this, and that's consistent, incidentally, with what Nerd Scum is basically stating, that he thinks. Yeah, Nerd Scum he points out an interesting series of events. It was right after that Diamond went out where Diamond has they offered their stores, they canceled orders, and they're promising a discount when things start up again. And then right after that, Marvel and DC, they're not publishing anything. They're not sending anything. Their printers aren't even open. So when you think of it that way, there might very well be some coordination of between DC and Marvel and Diamond in terms of, let's all ride out this storm together. Maybe that's what's happening. That's just speculation on my part, but I think that maybe everyone is so filled with fear right now, and it's a common human reaction that when you fear something, you stick to what you know, and even though that might be counter, that might not be the thinking that's required to get us out of this mess, but when you're afraid of something and you're afraid of the future, you stick to what you know. And right now, I think Marvel and DC might be thinking, well, better the devil we know, and that's time and distribution, than the one we don't, trying to find new distributors. So although I've heard the same thing, you mentioned Dark Knight and Joe, about DC looking at Random House and looking at books, other sort of distributors. So I'm not really sure what to believe right now, but it's definitely interesting times.
Based and I know Nerd Scum is saying in the chat here that he doesn't think Diamond. Oh, that's a good mug. Did you switch mugs in the middle of this conversation?
Yes, he did.
While Joe was talking, I didn't mean to be rude, Joe. I muted myself and yelled at my wife to get me a coffee. Just like what's that show? It goes, Mom, meatloaf.
Oh God, yeah.
There you go. But see, based on the conversation I had with the woman from Scholastic, it sounds like all but a done deal that DC in particular is going to be using other distributors with Diamond. I mean, Nerds Come, I don't think Diamond's going to be completely shot, because you make a good point about how Diamond does sell different product, but regarding kind of their control on the comic book industry, it will certainly be lessened. I think that this whole event, this pandemic, has shown the comic book industry that they can't rely on one distributor, because it is a weak link. Because if that distributor goes down, it really forces them to readjust. And it's almost fortunate for them that the pandemic is a plausible reason for them to not be distributing their weekly and monthly comics, because I think fans generally understand. But God forbid it were a totally different circumstance and Diamond, shut down distribution. What would the fans be looking at? They would probably be calling on the publishers and ragging on them for not having a more thorough network or structure to distribute their product. So I certainly think that Diamond's control on the distribution of comics in particular is going to be lessened. And I think that could be a very, very positive thing for comic books, because we need, obviously, to increase the readership, because there's so much competition for not only the entertainment dollar, but the time that people spend to be entertained. So, I think that this is going to be an overwhelmingly positive thing here, especially, like I was saying, the potential to get new audiences of, normal novel book readers into potentially comics. So it's going to be interesting. Time will tell. But I certainly think that Diamond's monopoly on comic book distribution is over.
Yeah. I just need to interject real quick. Actually, I got to get going now. We've got a Easter Day little mini celebration that the family planned out, so I am sorry. But thank you guys. This chat was super fun. It was awesome. It was great talking to you guys as always.
Happy Easter, Joe.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter to you and the family, man. Thank you for waking up early and shooting the shit with us. If you guys aren't already, make sure you go check out Joe. His channel link is in the description. Shoot him a subscription. He's been putting out a bunch of really cool Mark Waid Flash videos and reviews that have been really, really great and deserve much more credit and much more viewership. So make sure you guys go.
Thank you.
Before you jet out, do you want to let the folks know of the interwebs, what you're up to, what people have to look forward to on your channel?
Yeah, well, like you said, I've got the Flash by Mark Waid series coming out as of right now. I've also got another book or another sort of video being planned out, where I'm going to be looking at All-Star Batman, which the All-Star Batman and Robin, which I'm going to be also maybe putting on my Batman costume for that one, just for the fun of it. And those are like some of the big stuff I'm working on right now, and I'm really excited for the All-Star Batman and Robin one, just because I think I'm also working, because I also work I like to work with special effects too, so I'm also working on some very interesting effects for that video as well that I think will be quite interesting. to look at. But yeah, those are like the big two things I'm currently working on that you could definitely look forward to. And then when am done with the Mark Waid book 1, I've also got a few other trades that I'm looking at. Of course, the Grant Morrison, Mark Millar Flash trade I also have that I definitely want to be looking at as well after I get through.
That's great. That's great. Mark Millar's. Isn't that the Human Race and some of the other runs, or is that Morrison?
Well, yeah, the Morrison Millar one, yeah, that's all in one collective trade. So I'm not 100%, but I know this is the trade where we see the Flash doing some of the craziest stuff he's ever done.
Yeah.
So definitely got some fun stuff coming out. So yeah, definitely look forward to that. Again, thank you, gentlemen, for having me on. It was great to talk to you as always. We'll have to get together again.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for stopping by, and it's a good time as always. So have a great day with the family, man.
All right, happy Easter. Continue the conversation.
Will do. All right. Cool. So I know, let's see. I know Boom was having a little bit of a conversation here with Spike about the loss of retailers. See, that I think that's going to be the most tragic thing, is that we're definitely going to see some brick and mortar shops having to close down. And unfortunately, it does feel like a sense of natural selection. And I think the stores that are going to survive are going to be the ones that have diversified their product. The ones that are selling more than just comics and able to kind of make up for that loss.
I tend to be. I'm going to be a little bit more optimistic than my good friend Spike. He says 25 to 50%. I think it's going to be less. I think it's going to be bad, but I'm hoping it's going to be closer to no more than 25%. Because I really think that, and my bias is, okay, I live in a city of 60,000 people, and that's not a lot by a lot of American city standards. I get that. But even in my small city here, where we only have one comic shop, my comic book retailer, okay, he's been in business for 25 years, but he's diversified. He could not survive if he only sold comic books. Comic books are like 25, 30%. At times he said it fluctuates between 20 to 30% of his business, but he's diverse. He's still open now. We're not completely shut down. And he's diversified enough that he can still probably make a living with, if he loses comic books, he can wait out the next 2 or 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I choose to think that is it the case that, I don't know, in your experience, Dark Knight, and people in the chat, are the local comic shops that you go to, do they just sell comic books? I mean, because mine sells a lot more than comic books. Like I'm not used to going into a comic shop where there's only comic books. So usually there's always toys, dungeon, like there's other stuff beyond comic books, but I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, like my comic book store certainly has like other products, but and to be 100% honest with you, and this isn't like a slap to comic book retailers, but a majority of them are not business people. They're comic book people that either, want to, kind of be a source of community for comic book fans, or they think that they're going to make money, which is obviously not a smart idea because comic book stores aren't exactly the way to bring in the bread. So I think that's kind of a big component of the fact that I don't think many comic book retailers or owners are truly like business people. They're comic book people that happen to run a business. And I would agree with Spike. I think 50% is a little bit extreme, but I don't think the profit margin in these types of businesses are particularly high unless, you're someone like Midtown Comics that can buy, hundreds of copies of books, or like a Forbidden Planet. So I would venture to say that I think realistically we'll see somewhere between the closure of 25 and maybe 35% of local comic book stores. I mean, hell, even big businesses like Barnes and Noble are in trouble, and they've diversified a hell of a lot more content than comics. So only time will tell. And it's a very unfortunate thing, but I'm hoping that, the comic book industry is the metaphorical phoenix that rises from the ashes and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And I just want to make a quick comment too that it's not, in fairness to comic book retailers. I mean, look at AMC, the largest theater chain in the world, might be going bankrupt because, and so the movie industry is really struggling as well. So even the movie industry, I mean, the movie industry no longer arguably does not have a distribution system anymore if they lose AMC. I mean, AMC is the largest theater chain in the world, and good God, when that's gone, I mean, forget about comic books. I mean, you take something that is a more popular medium like the movies, and they're facing disaster right now, so they're going to be looking for bailouts. Hollywood, they're looking to Hollywood to bail them out theatrically for their distribution, because they'll still be able to make movies, albeit on a tighter budgets in the future. But if they lose the theaters, then that's a problem. So comic books, with their distribution system and problems in that regard, it's being felt. To distribution systems across the board are being hard hit.
Well, that's the thing. I think that no matter what, like, we will always have, like, I don't think that AMC potentially declaring bankruptcy will affect, the amount of theaters out there. I think that regardless, somebody will be there to pick up those pieces, because the film industry is such a moneymaker, generally speaking, at least for the studios. And I think the studios certainly have an incentive to engage some type of bailout. I mean, even looking at the comic book industry, there is a wide network of creators and executives who are providing some type of bailout money to brick and mortar stores, or looking to support them, or give them, some type of advertising. I mean, Jim Lee has been doing all of these sketches to fund comic book stores. I know, a lot of professionals are making donations. Donnie Cates has been commissioning a bunch of art from not well-known artists to support their work. So there's a lot out there, and I think Hollywood has the incentive to help bail out movie theaters, because first of all, movie theaters don't even take a big cut of films at all. Like, movie theaters are a very low profit margin business, even though some of these films are bringing in $1 to $2 billion, hundreds of millions of dollars at the least. So I think that the incentive is certainly there for Hollywood to assist them in some way. But even if AMC starts to crumble a little bit, just by virtue of the fact that there is a demand for cinema, I don't think we're going to see it going anywhere anytime soon. And like I said, because of the fact that studios make exponentially more money by putting people in a theater rather than streaming something on demand, I don't think it's going to be going anywhere. It's at the very worst, you might see, other companies start to pick up those pieces. Maybe other companies that don't have a stake in the movie theater industry might be there to pick up some of those pieces. Who knows? But I'm not really as worried for film, and I'm honestly not worried for the comic book industry. I'm more worried for the smaller retailers of comic books, because in fact, with the comic book industry seeking multi-distributor models, I think the comic book industry could actually come out of this better than it came in.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think everything's going to be smaller scale. Everyone, obviously, there's going to be some growing pains again, because people are going to have to regrow, because this has really shrunk the budgets, shrunk everything. So there's going to be some short-term pain to get back into things. And yeah, there's no question about that. I want to point out something Spike said about the other international factor is to consider, is how the dollar conversion rates have skyrocketed for international diamond clients. That's like half their client list. That's a very good point. I mean, the dollar, here in Canada, when it's $1.30 for every dollar, American dollar, and I'm paying $1.30 as a Canadian. And of course, my comic book retailers, they're in Canada here, they spend that much more money. So that's definitely a factor as well. And clearly that's a factor for movies as well. So everything's connected, and, a rising tide raises all ships. And hopefully once this pandemic is over, all of us will, we're all going to have some growing pains.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting too, because obviously with it being a pandemic, this virus has affected pretty much every major country. And I'm wondering, like, how that will convert to, like, the monetary conversion, because obviously countries like the United States and Italy, and other like European countries have been hit really hard by this. So I wonder if like the intensity by which the virus has impacted them in terms of population will also impact the conversion of the dollar, because it may be telling as to how quickly countries like this will recover. And I'm curious as how that's going to translate to monetary conversion. It doesn't have as much to do with comic books, but it makes me wonder, you know?
Well, every country out there is going to be printing more money. The U.S.
Yep.
is going to be printing more money with all these $1 trillion surpluses or $1 trillion, aid packages for their economy. And there's two ways to stimulate an economy. You either do it through spending, or you do it through credit. Well, credit's been used. Banks may not want to extend a lot of credit, so how do you encourage spending? Well, one way is you can print more money, get more money out there to give some money away, so people start to spend. Spending stimulates the economy, and that's what all the governments are doing. It's a very common economic trend, and I'm not an economist. That's just Economy 101, and that's what's happening. And so, with all these countries printing more money, because that's what's going to be happening, what's going to happen with the dollar? Is it all going to fluctuate at the same time? Or I imagine it's not. So, anyways, but that's not a comic book discussion. But as you said, there's definitely some overlap there.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to get the end of Nerdscum's comments around Diamond, he says, not to get him wrong, he's all for Diamond no longer having full control, and he's considering all aspects. No, I mean, Nerdscum, you made a lot of really good points. In your perspective, working within a comic book retailer is definitely valued in this conversation above most, because you're seeing it from the ground up. So it's a really curious situation.
Yeah. I just want to make it too. Splash Comics says that printing money increases inflation. That's not true, Splash Comics. Printing money does not increase inflation if the debt level remains high. And right now we got massive debt. So if you print more money, it doesn't lead to more inflation. That's not entirely true. This isn't like the 1920s in Germany.
That's interesting. I didn't know that at all. So that's good to know. Yeah, it's going to be really, really interesting times. But we're starting to approach the 2-hour mark. I think we could probably take a couple other questions or quick topics from folks in the chat before we close. So definitely, you guys start firing some comments our way, some questions if you want anything, if you want us to discuss anything in particular. But yeah, I mean the future of pretty much every entertainment industry is in total flux right now. I mean the only industry that is going to for sure continue to see growth is streaming, but streaming was already going to continue growing before this pandemic happened. Cable TV is going away. Streaming is everybody's kind of main resource for entertainment now. So it's obviously going to be interesting to see how this pandemic might have affected that. A lot of people are making a lot of interesting predictions about the future of cinema, about the future of television. But to be honest with you, I don't think the pandemic has changed a heck of a lot about, the future of streaming services as sources of entertainment.
Yeah. Interesting times. We're all, I love the speculation here. We usually speculate on comic books, but you got to speculate about the economy because it affects the comic books. And interesting times.
This is interesting. Going back to our discussion on the film industry, Nerdscum says that the larger movie studios have always had the option of going back to the old model where they owned the theaters themselves, and that Disney has already been discussing opening a line of Disney exclusives. I'm kind of surprised that Disney hasn't tried this venture sooner, just because they are probably, I mean, I don't even think probably, I don't think it's far-fetched to say that they're the most profited movie studio out there, or at least they have been for the last 20 years. So I can't help
that's true. I watched one video directly related to what you're saying. Grace Randolph, she's a great YouTuber. She gave a very specific and detailed YouTube video. It's only about 10 minutes long, but she goes in great detail in a Coles Notes version about why this is devastating for Disney. And she sort of educated me, because I never really, everything she said makes so much sense. She made it so concise. And basically that Disney has, like a lot of movie studios in the last 10 years, Disney made a lot of huge acquisitions They bought Marvel. They bought.
Lucasfilm.
Yeah, Lucasfilm, and they're still paying. They're still working on paying some of those things back. And you go into debt. You go into long-term debt to eventually to make a lot of money. And so you can, even though they've made billion-dollar movies, that doesn't mean that they've made a powerful, that they're still making their debt payments. They still need to make their debt payments, and making billion-dollar movies is helpful. But the only thing that Disney has going right now are their gift shops online. They're all of their Disneyland's closed. Everything's closed. The movies are shut down. Their lifeblood of Disney has been completely shut down. Everything. They've had to lay people off. They got no money coming in. They can't make their debt payments. They can't make them. They can't make their payments on anything at this point. So this notion that Disney can come out of this and they're readily going to buy up theaters. They're going to have nothing to buy up theaters with. They're going to have to borrow money. What bank's going to borrow them money? If the theater chain is gone, you got to look at, like, I don't know the answer to this question. All I know is this is catastrophic for Disney. This is catastrophic for any movie chain. And it's wrong to assume just because it's powerful Disney that they're not going to be very, very seriously adversely affected by this. And I don't know. It's not rosy for anybody right now.
You make a really good point. And that's something I don't think I really thought through. Spike even makes a point, about how Disney's in crisis and how they're in serious debt. And I think what Spike is referring to about them going billions of dollars into debt last month, I think it was specifically the week that Disney decided to close all of their parks and that theaters were closed. I think in that week, that first week alone, Disney lost $85 billion, which
crazy.
is nuts. And I know their stock has been going down. Obviously, looking at the stock market plummeting as with everything else, I considered investing in some stock while everything is low. And Disney's stock prices saw some along with everybody else, but Disney's stock saw some pretty significant drops over the course of this pandemic so far. So it's going to be interesting what happens. And I know a lot of financial analysts out there are saying that Apple is in a position to buy Disney. I don't think they will, because obviously Apple is probably seeing some loss. Disney is also worth a hell of a lot of money. I don't remember the estimate, but it would still be a massive investment for anybody to make coming out of a dire financial situation like the world economy is now. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be really interesting. I mean, the entire world is in a crazy state of flux. But as interesting as this conversation has been, I think we should probably circle back to comic books a little bit as we get to the end of the show. Although, I'm not regretting it, because this was a really interesting conversation to be had. But I'm really, really curious about what's going to go down specifically with DC, because obviously with Dan DiDio being gone and the world in a state of flux, I feel like it's given them time to kind of consolidate and figure out what they're going to do with DC 5G, and whether or not it's good or not is, we'll see. But I'm curious, man. Like, and I know you would mention specifically like a tonal trajectory for DC, them knowing that there has to be some sort of positivity to come out of their books. But do you have anything, like any other predictions about, what you think DC could be doing with 5G? Like, do you think we're still going to be getting, the scenarios that were kind of predicted and or I guess revealed to us by some comic book media outlets, where we're getting all of these like third string legacy characters taking over the mantles? Like, do you think we're still getting that? Like, what's going to go on from here?
Let me start off answering that by saying right out of the gate that I genuinely don't know, but I can tell you what I think they should do, and what maybe they are doing. But I say this with some degree of egocentrism on my part, because it's wishful thinking on my part, and it's my clear bias, because I think that I'm caveat this by referring to something Dan Didio said. Dan Didio was on Joe Quesada's Morning Cup of Joe on YouTube, and sorry, you there?
Yeah, yep, I can see you now.
Sorry, somebody tried calling me.
No, it's all good, man.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You're good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can't. I don't know why I can't hear you.
Did it mute the? Oh, he can't hear me, so I guess.
I don't know what's going on here.
Let's see.
Anyways, so you say you can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well then, in any event, Dan Didio made the comment that that apparently during the New 52 era, the first year of the New 52 went really well, and then he found in the second year and third year that the writers lost their focus and what have you. And my concern about that is there's no excuse. The writers shouldn't have lost their focus in the second year of the New 52 or third year, and that to me just shows bad editorial policy, and you should have been able to write that ship. And so my concern is coming out of this pandemic, they should be looking on changing their tone, sticking with a particular tone, sticking either with Rebirth, or if it's going to be more dark, fine, but stick with it, be consistent. And that's what I hope happens. I do hope that I'm hoping that they're inspired to write feel-good stories, to make people feel better, to realize that we want stories that are entertaining and more hopeful now more than ever. And that's what I hope happens.
Can you hear me now at all? Have we resolved?
Investment for anybody to make.
I guess you can't hear me yet. I don't know.
God damn it.
Well, I guess I'll talk a little bit while Boom figures out the technical difficulties.
I'm gonna caveat this by referring.
So let's see.
Sorry, I don't know. Sorry, my brother called me and he called me on my phone here, and now you can hear me, but I can't hear you guys, and I don't know what's going on. I'm gonna try going in and out again.
All right. Okay. So I'll address Spike's question while we're waiting for ComicBoom to hop back in. Do we think that this pandemic will help boost digital comic sales? I certainly thought that was the case before publishers completely stopped distribution of all of their comics. Like at the point when we weren't getting any sort of responses from these publishers about what they were going to do, with local comic book stores kind of being forced to some close down and some alter their model of retail for the near future. From going on from here, I really don't know. I'm not really comfortable making a strong prediction about any increase in digital comics, because I think that largely the people who are buying physical comics will still continue to buy physical comics for the same reasons that they have been. So it'll be really interesting. Boom, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Yeah, I had to go in and out again. I don't know that. Somebody tried calling me and it screwed up. I don't know why you could hear me and I couldn't hear you. But anyways, sorry.
Weird. I was just addressing Spike's question here that I have on the screen, and I was saying that I would have said that I thought that it would have boosted digital comic book sales if comic book publishers were still distributing their comics through this quarantine and this time of self-isolation. But because they haven't been, I don't necessarily think that'll be the case, because most of the demand for people who are collecting physical comics to move to digital is, it can be a number of things. It can be space. It can be, just a being tired of organization, things of that nature. And I don't think that this pandemic has kind of increased any sort of need for people who are buying physical to go digital, just because everything's been halted. Like I said, if in fact DC and Marvel and these big publishers weren't standing in solidarity with brick and mortar stores, and that maybe they were releasing digital comics while we were all isolating, I might have said yes, because I had considered not switching to digital, but picking up a couple of books digitally while we're going through all of this. So I don't know. What are you thinking, Boom?
Well, there's two sides. There's, I guess you could say, there's the, like I say, one of my great friends is my comic book retailer, and so I love the guy to death. But there's the evil side of me that is sort of indifferent to comic book retailers on this, and I'll just say this: absolutely, it would have boosted digital sales. But Marvel and DC aren't putting out anything new on digital sales. I think they should be, straight up. When DC, and I think DC, if DC was thinking with their business mind, they would. DC has come out and said that our digital audience is separate. According to their interior studies, their digital audience is separate from their physical audience. So why not put out digital sales? Here's the reality. If they are in fact two different audiences, and they are, because I generally don't buy digital. I have them, yes, but I focus on physical. Guess what? The comic book speculator market, they're going to come back in spades when this pandemic's over. Nothing's going to stop them from coming back. They're going to come back, and there's going to be a speculator market on these comic books. Fewer might be published, and the ones that were are backlogged or are still in warehouses. It's going to be this frenzy about trying to get copies of this or that. It's going to thrive. It's going to be fine. Meanwhile, you're not putting the industry first. If you want to put the comic book industry first, you pump out your current comic books digitally. Like what like do you think they're going to lose 20 to 25%, or they're going to lose it anyway? You know, this pandemic, you're going to lose the comic book retailers anyway through this pandemic. Why do you want to lose the comic book reader? I mean, to me, that's nonsense. I can't emphasize this enough. It's a huge mistake. Put the comic books out digitally, because guess what? We should have Death Metal 1 and 2 right now in our hands digitally. And guess what?
I don't know if Death Metal was even originally slated.
Well, I'm just using that as an example. I'm just, I'm just saying, because if we had that issue now, Death Metal 1 now, and then 2 months from now, I could buy a physical copy of it. If I'm a physical copy kind of guy, I'm going to go buy that. If I'm a speculator, I'm going to go buy that. And I just... But
two quick things. One, we have to also keep in mind that comic books are an expensive hobby, and not everybody kind of has the resources to essentially buy 2 copies of every book. And before we move too far forward, Nerdstream just kind of peacing out, saying that he enjoyed the stream and that he hopes that everybody is having a good one and being safe. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Nerdscum. See you later, bud.
It was good hearing your thoughts, and it was good chatting with you. So, yeah, thanks for joining the chat with us today. But in regards to what you were saying, it is such a rough situation. I personally do agree and think that publishers probably should have continued at least publishing a portion of their books online. Maybe not the full slate of their line, but something. We should have continued to get something. Regarding like the availability, regarding like the rationale that because true speculators would have bought on digital and then repurchased on print, I don't quite know if that's the case, just because comics are naturally a really expensive hobby already. And I know for me personally, my pull list is, easily, depending on the week, anywhere between like $60 to $100 a week in comic books. And that price is usually after my 20% discount. So, I personally wouldn't be able to afford both, at least not, and definitely not in the same frequency that I buy physical issues, so it's a really difficult call to make. But I do agree with you in the sense that I think that these publishers still should have been releasing something for people to read.
Yes. And again, you have to put the industry first. And, and I know this is going to sound, since when I'm going to be such a jerk when I say this, but since when does DC or Marvel give a shit about retailers anyway? And same with Comixology. I mean, you got to put the industry first. Where do you think? If ever there was a time to piss off retailers, do it now. It's a pandemic. They're going to come back. And if they don't come back, you got the digital market. But guess what? They are going to come back. We're all in the same boat. We're all desperate. We're all suffering through this. You got to do what you got to do. You got to make tough decisions. And, you're going to piss off Brian Hibbs. You're going to piss off some retailers here and there. But guess what? they're still going to be there when it's all over. The ones that are strong enough to survive, you better believe they're going to continue to sell comic books.
I can't help but think though that there has to be some underlying reason why they're doing it. Like, I don't think that they're holding distribution to the the direct consumer just because like they're doing it in solidarity. I'm sure there has to be a monetary reason for it. You know what I mean? I don't think they're doing this on principle. And I think it might have to do with like the overwhelming like let me restart the sentence. I think it largely has to do with the fact that they're not releasing like the numbers for digital. And I don't think that numbers for digital are overwhelmingly high. And because of that, I think that them showing this kind of quote unquote solidarity publicly is largely because of that. I don't think the revenue stream is strong enough through digital. And I think that they're afraid that by getting like brick and mortar stores as kind of sparse as they are now, like to piss them off, I think would really, really hurt them bad. So I think that whatever they're doing right now and their decisions that they're making regarding, again, this supposed solidarity with local comic book stores is because of some sort of financial motivation.
Yeah. I actually think, and this is so cynical of me, but I don't think DC and Marvel is doing this to necessarily save the retailer. I think they're doing it because of the pandemic anyway. No one's going to go to comic shops. They're shut down anyway because of the crisis. I think so. They shut down the printers. They shut it all down anyway. Most of the printers can't be up and running anyway. DC's printers are in Canada. I think Marvel's printers, some of them I even heard, they might even be out of country too for Marvel. So I think the reality is that it's a shitstorm anyway. So it's easier for DC and Marvel to sell this like we're standing by our retailers in solidarity, when the truth is they don't have a goddamn choice. And to me, it's just good PR. Make yourself look like the hero, standing with solidarity with the retailers and Diamond, and we're in this together. And and I guess and we all are, but at the same time, bullshit walks here. And you can still put stuff out digitally, and they're not doing it. And not only that, why don't they put stuff more out? They got so much content. Why don't they let me just insult DC and Marvel for a second by first complimenting Joe Quesada, right? Joe Quesada, he does Cup of Joe. He's talking comic books with other professionals, Dan Didio on YouTube. That's fantastic. Where are all the creators? How come they're not on YouTube? They got no problem going on Twitter and bitching about their politics. Why don't you go on YouTube and talk comic books like Scott Snyder does once in a while? You got all this free time on your hands. Well, why aren't you out promoting the industry, doing something? Like, actually think outside the box a little bit here. Kudos to Jim Lee for auctioning off his artwork. I mean, that's what I want to see more of. I see painfully little of this by the creators and the writers and the artists out there. We see some, and credit where credit's due, but there should be a lot more. But again, I mean, they're all struggling. I know they're not rich. I know it's not people don't get rich in the comic book industry, but at the same time, and again, maybe I'm an outlier here, and maybe I'm sounding like a jerk, but seems to me that more could be done with a little bit more enthusiasm, despite this being a pandemic. If you got all the spare time anyhow, I think that there could be a lot more done by these creators than what I'm seeing. And again, I'll give a shout out to Donny Cates for buying art, and he's doing his bid too. And he'll say something controversial and piss people off, but he'll turn around and he'll put something back and to the community. So I want to give credit where credit's due, but I'd like to see much more of that, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth. I don't think you're saying that they have an obligation to do it, but it would certainly be a nice thing to see. Just that kind of sense of unity in the industry, and being able to take this time to interact with the fans. And some creators are doing that. I mean, Donny Cates even started a YouTube channel with his wife where they do a comic book club every week. And it's been entertaining at the very least to see him kind of interact with people. And as you mentioned, Scott Snyder and Joe Quesada always kind of has an online presence. I think we're starting to see an increased number of that. Like, I'm seeing guys like Francis Manipul doing it Jason Fabok did it for like a month before he stopped for whatever reason, because he can love him to death, but he can never consistently do anything. So I think we're starting to see an increased amount of comic book creators out there who are trying to reach out to their fans in some way. I mean, as you and I know that, the whole YouTube grind is difficult to be consistent with, to produce like some level of quality content. So, I give them a little bit of slack, because I know that their jobs are very time demanding. If, especially as artists, if you were to try to piece through what you're getting paid hourly, it really doesn't add up very well for you, because you invest a lot more time into your work than you're getting compensated for financially most of the time. So it's a precarious situation. Like, would it be nice? Yeah, but I don't think they're obligated. And to that, and to further that, I think we are starting to see more people come out and do things like that.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I know I sound a little harsh here, but actually, Spike makes an interesting comment that you put up there. Donny Cates has been reaching out to Ethan Van Sciver, and that is very interesting. I completely agree. I mean, I couldn't imagine two people who are on different sides of probably the political spectrum than Donny Cates and Ethan Van Sciver. So it's interesting that dialogue is being created there, and I think that's a good thing, because in these pandemic times, especially, people, we need to, more people need to do like what we're doing here at Dark Knight. You and I, we can disagree on things, but we can still have constructive discussions and come away disagreeing with each other, but still learning from each other. And it's Donny, professionals need to show that example. And if Donny Cates, for example, has been doing that, good for him. Ethan Van Sciver, he's never one to shy away from controversy. And notwithstanding the fact that I think that sometimes his ego and his narcissism get in the way, nonetheless, I would never, ever silence his voice or suggest that people not listen to him for his perspective, because, he does have something to say, and it's always worth listening to. Sometimes it's worth listening to somebody precisely because they think differently than you. And I think we need to have more of that in the comic book industry.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I've said this on many occasions. The reason I collaborate with you as much as I do, and because, I mean, let's be real, like my stream discussion show, like Let's Talk Comics, although I occasionally have other guests, like that is our show, like no doubt about it. And there's a reason why I do that. And it's because we can totally disagree on things and come out of the conversation, maybe not even disagreeing, maybe not even agreeing by the end of it, but come out of it respecting each other and kind of being opened up to new perspectives. And sometimes we do change each other's perspective. And that's just as great. That's just as good. And I think, and I wish that more fans of comic books and more fans of entertainment in general were more willing to do that and just have those conversations and engage in those dialogues. I mean, the unfortunate thing about the Donny Cates and EVS thing is, I'm pretty sure that has been blown to the ground, because I did keep up briefly with that whole scenario. And I guess Donny Cates has, I guess Ethan Van Sciver, somebody asked Ethan Van Sciver if they were still going to have this private talk that they were planning to have. And then Ethan had said something like, oh, Donny Cates said everything he needed to say. So no, which is unfortunate. But I guess like the fact that Donny reached out is a definite like glimmer of hope that we can at least kind of start to coexist and get rid of a little bit of that negativity between people, because the world will already provide those things. I don't think we need to be actively feeding any of that. And like you said before, we can disagree, and that can be just as good as you and I, skipping around and singing each other's praises or singing praises for the same thing.
Yeah, and it is worth noting that one thing about Ethan Van Sciver, and one thing about, I think there is one positive thing that comes out of the comic book culture war, the SJW versus Comicsgate controversy, regardless of where one stands on that. And that's something that's very volatile in the industry. And you know, I have my own private views on it, and I know you do too, and we don't often talk about it, and because we don't, because it's sort of it's a dangerous thing to talk about, and it's not always particularly constructive. But I will say this, that I think that if the comic book industry comes out of this current pandemic crisis, the fact that we've had this comic book culture war, I actually think is a good thing, because it's as negative as the comic book culture war can be, it has in many ways revitalized the independent market. It's led to more independent publishing. I think it's inspired a lot of writers, both in Comicsgate and on the SJW side, or however you want to phrase it. And I think from controversy sometimes can come growth and can inspire new creative ideas. And that's, I always try to look at things from a positive point of view, because I think I've always found that I've been in both camps. I've played on both camps and both sides. And frankly, I don't want to sound like Donald Trump when I say this, but there are really good people on both sides here. There really are. But sometimes they argue at cross purposes, and they misunderstand what the other is saying, and they get caught up in definitions, right? I mean, somebody will say Comicsgate, well, that means you're a racist. And then a person who claims to be a comic skater says, no, it's not. That we just want good storytelling. We're not racist. And so you get caught up in definitions. And when you get caught up in definitions, you don't actually talk about the substance. You don't actually talk about the issues. You get caught up in labels. And that's what I hate about the whole comic book culture war, is that you get caught up in labels and you miss the content of a person's character, the quality of their argument, and you stop listening because you focus on the label. And that's wrong. And that's one thing that, I would hope that maybe in these pandemic times that we can all step back and just take a collective breath and say, hey, you know what? We all love comic books and we all love a good story. And doesn't really matter how you label it. Does it really matter what the color of the skin is of the person who wrote the story, or the fact that maybe they're assholes on Twitter? But is the story good that they wrote? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't agree with Donny Cates on Twitter all the time, but I love his Thor run, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that too, the way people decide to kind of ascribe qualities to various labels of people is very indicative of the rest of the world. You know what I mean? Can you hear me?
Sorry, my phone rang again. I'm being interrupted with people calling and wishing me a happy Easter. So yeah.
Can you hear me though?
I got to go in and out again here. Just a moment.
No worries. But I'll continue, or let's see. Sorry. I'll continue on what I was saying here. I largely think that let's see. I'll just put him in and then I'll continue.
Am I back?
Good.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I can hear you now too. Yeah.
Cool.
Sorry, I'm going to get more people calling me here in the next little bit here, so I might have to end the stream here in a bit.
Yeah, no worries. I think we can pretty much end on this topic. But what I was saying is, I think that, regarding people labeling, comic book fans as SJWs or Comicsgate or whatever, I think is largely indicative of issues throughout the world and the way we tend to label certain groups of people and ascribe qualities to them based on like those large populations. And I think that generalizing will never do you any good, because there are good and bad people pretty much on each side. You know what I mean? Like, there are people who claim Comicsgate that are clearly very intelligent and clearly, passionate people. There are people in Comicsgate that do fit, unfortunately, those generalizations. There are people on the SJW side who are, equally as intelligent, who are equally as articulate, equally as talented. But there are also those who fit the stereotypes, about being hyper defensive and victimizing themselves. So, I don't really believe in generalizing. And it's largely why in pretty much all aspects of my life, I tend to be very middle of the road, very independent, because I see issues on either side of the road. And I don't care to assign myself to groups because I know they get generalized in a certain way. But I think the important thing in all of this is, I think you make a good point about the independent market. I think it's really nice that comic book creators are seeing an outlet in crowdfunding so that they can cut out the middleman, because I mean, it provides direct access to the creators and the product. which is an interesting thing to introduce to the market because you're starting to see bigger names do that too, like Sean Gordon Murphy, and that's really exciting. And you know, for me, kind of pursuing publishing my first comic, I will certainly be taking the crowdfunding route because it is an expensive process, and it gives people in comics specifically an outlet to run, you know, and produce their comic books early on, especially because it isn't an easy thing to do, like breaking into comics. You not only are investing an ample amount of time, but you're paying to publish the book. So it is a really difficult scenario, and I think having the option of crowdsourcing is awesome. And at the end of the day, you know, I hope that you're right, Boom. I really do, and I hope this culture war and this pandemic have caused people to look at things differently, and hopefully we can kind of foster a little bit more of a community. There will always be disagreements, and there will always be aggressive disagreements in any type of culture. You know, whether it's a sociological thing, a political thing, a fan based thing. Um,
Yeah.
but you know, at the end of the day, there's a reason why, you know, yourself, Joey, and I sat down and had this conversation with our viewers, just because we wanted to interact and talk comic books and engage. And I hope that after everything is said and done, I hope that that is the case for most people in, you know, the comic book fandom, and I hope that they feel the same way. We do get something here in the comments from a friend of the channel, Hawk World, kind of echoing very similar sentiments, which is awesome. He says, "Morning, guys, 3 a.m. here. I think as this isolation era continues, people will figure out more ways to reach out and support what they love. It's definitely a challenge." Hawk World, Mr. Timboard, I definitely agree with you, and I very much hope that's the case.
Yeah, and check out Hawk World. That guy loves Hawkman, and I gotta say to Tim, I love your new. I hope the new. He I know he tweeted on Twitter that he has to move all his Hawk figures to another room because his one child has taken over his one comic book room, and so I hope that transition went well. I know he posted pictures on Twitter, so I would encourage people to follow Tim Board on Twitter. He's a great guy to follow, especially even if you're not a lover of Hawkman or Hawkwoman, you will be. Just follow him on Twitter, and at some point we should probably even get him on a stream at some point and talk all things Hawkman.
Oh yeah, I was fortunate enough for Hawk World the last year to sit down with Tim and talk about why people should be reading Robert Venditti's Hawkman. And if somebody's viewing this that is not necessarily privy to Hawkman, he is your encyclopedia of all things Hawkman. So I can definitely echo Comic Boom sentiments here. Make sure you give him a follow on all social media at Hawk World. He even has a great site. So if you're interested on reading up on the character, getting a little bit more, becoming a little bit more privy, he has everything you could possibly need. So yeah, Hawk World, Mr. Timboard, great guy, and I'm glad he popped into the chat to say hello. So thank you. But yeah, you know, end of the day, I can only hope that comic book fans can kind of come together and be able to enjoy the things that we all love, right? Like there are certainly disagreements, and we can have them, and that's okay. But as long as we can have disagreements civilly and that we can grow from them, that's what matters, you know. And I hope that at the end of the day, we can walk out of this pandemic and largely feel a sense of that in the community.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I just want to. I got to go now. I just want to thank you, Dark Knight. I wish you a happy Easter. Thank you so much. Again, it's always been a blast. And thank you, everybody in the chat. Thank you, Spike, Tim Board, Tevya. Good Lord, there's lots of people in the chat that ask questions. Nerd Scum, all of them. I had a great time. Brevin Campbell. Yeah, just a really good time. Even Sonic the Hedgehog there, who for some reason got a little crazy with the chats, but I'm not sure if that was by design. But in any event, good times. Good times.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I mean, I think this is a good time to close out the show, man. Thank you to Joey who joined us earlier, and obviously Comic Boom. Thank you for getting up and shooting the shit. And I want to thank everybody that joined us live. This was an awesome stream, and it was really great to sit and chat with you guys. So if you guys would be interested in us doing something like this again in the future, please let us know in the chat, like this video so that we are aware that this is something you'd want to see. And maybe get in touch with us through social media to let us know what other topics you might want us to talk about during a stream like this. But quick shout outs to to a couple of the people that were crucial and integral to this live stream. Spike, Aggressively Relaxing, Splash Page Comics, Samoki Dude, Sonic the Hedgehog, Brevin Campbell, Ant Duhar, Nerd Scum, Eric Breen, Tevye Smolka. I think I caught most everybody. Obviously, Tim Board, Hawkworld. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are the lifeblood of our content, and we make this content for you guys. So we're really glad that you could sit and chat with us. And if you haven't already, please make sure to go to Comic Boom's channel. Link in the description below. He puts out some of the best damn comic book reviews on the internet. So go check him out. Subscribe. Get him to that big fat 1,000 subscriber count. He deserves it. And if you decide to stick around on my channel, please make sure to subscribe. Hit that little notification button. We're going to be putting out a review of the first 4 issues of Donny Cates' Thor that I had recommended prior. And obviously coming at you with a bunch of comic book discussions. And be on the lookout on Comic Boom's channel for his review on God Country and our collaborative stream for that coming up. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been the first episode of Comics and Coffee. Hopefully the first of many. And you guys have a wonderful Easter if you celebrate it. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And cheers to Comics and Coffee.
Nice.